Yeah, well. Valley. Mortar. Yeah, so you have to. Second in the floor. You're right. Right. So what do you? Most of the law. Winter.
Should we save these seats for other commissioners?
I don't know.
We have assigned seating. You're in a perfect spot.
I always want to sit by Chris.
We'll save these for the other commissioners. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Sir? Oh, Chad, thank you.
Good, how you doing, sir?
Hello, sir.
How you doing? No, I'm a country club.
Oh,
They already feeding you guys?
Yeah. A little hairier than I saw last.
Figured they get the most work out of us.
we're kinder.
Is Steve presenting it all today?
I think he's got one of the CPs, if not the both administrative items.
Okay.
Is that, you're preparing for the worst?
Just kidding. I gotta talk to him. But I might just talk to him tomorrow, so it depends on how long we. Howdy. Is that tea? How are you? Good. How you doing? How's it going? Good. Good. How you doing? Good. Sarah, she's still here. Sarah? No, Upper Valley, wrong valley. She's on West. We talked about the wrong planning commission. Yeah. My bad. Yeah. Jared, you should be working. Not me, though. No.
Apparently this is on. I just got a text from Steve that said, I heard you. I heard you. I heard you.
Get in here, Steve.
That guy's terrible.
I gotta talk to Steve. God, that's the hour.
We ready?
Yep, we're ready.
Or making me.
Harvey, you ready? I'm ready. Sorry. Chair. All right, Rick, we ready? We are. Okay. Appreciate Upper Valley Planning Commission taking an hour to meet with Weber County Commission this afternoon. Look forward to the opportunity to have some discussion regarding some of the issues you've been dealing with the past couple months. Knowing that we and the county commission very much supports the time and effort you put in to the job you do. We know it's not a very high paying job, but it's a very important job. So Rick, if it's okay, we're gonna start this discussion because there seems to be quite a bit of discussion on these my copies,
Those are your comments.
on the general plan that was put into force by the county commission back in 2017, as I recall, right? I wasn't there, Commissioner Bolos wasn't there. So I've asked Commissioner Harvey to take just a few minutes and start from the basics in terms of what the general plan, how that general plan developed in 2017. And really kind of the basics of how this county commission, from planning and legal and public input, that we arrived at that, when I say we arrived, the county arrived at that general plan. And with that, I'm going to turn some time over to Commissioner Harvey to really give the foundation of that, because I think in the discussions we've seen from the planning commission and from the public, there seems to be some disagreement on whether the general plan is being followed, whether it's not, and if it's the proper plan to follow. So, Commissioner Harvey.
Thanks. Let me, for those of you here on this commission, first off, know that before I came down here in 2017, I was at the Golden Spike Event Center, River County Fairgrounds for 24 years. And by virtue of that, just maybe a couple years before that, was so probably about 2015, because of our involvement with Culture Parks and Recreation, which ends up turning into North Fork Park and Weaver Memorial and those things. I was invited to participate with what was then called the GEM Committee. Now, I don't know if that's still alive or what that, but most of you know what that GEM Committee is. They were basically a group of people up there that cared about the Upper Valley and how that went. And it was headed by a gentleman by the name of Kimball Wheatley. And at Kimball's request, I would attend, I didn't attend a lot, 2 or 3 of those meetings, and I got to listen to the genesis of what those folks wanted in that plan. I didn't attend a lot of their meetings, but they tried to include me on some of the things that they wanted up there. Well, later on, I decided to run for commission and then got the. Sorry, that's okay. I thought then there wasn't anyway, I was the commissioner-elect and attended one more meeting, and I remember having several conversations with Mr. Wheatley at the time, and he would emphasize to me the importance of that general plan and how many, I would say tens of thousands of hours were put into that plan. It's what the residents wanted. I kept hearing, this is what the residents wanted. This is what the residents wanted. And so I found it interesting then leaving the Golden Spike and going down here to the commission, totally being fed by a fire hose on how all this stuff works. And I don't know that I still completely understand it. It's still learning it at just a phenomenal pace on what that was. But I remember at the time when Commissioner Gibson and Commissioner Ebert and myself were sitting there, the topic of discussion would come up, and the then Upper Valley Planning Commission had some suggestions, and I remember that during the meeting when the general plan was approved, which was in about 6 months after I was a commissioner, I remember there was quite a bit of public comment pertaining to the general plan, and the Upper Valley Planning Commission gave a support of that general plan. That all the comments were in support of that general plan, and at that time we voted to approve that general plan for the Upper Valley, which I think a lot of it had to do with taking a lot of the density or it had to do a lot with the 3 acre lots of putting spot density around the whole valley. Instead of, and just everywhere. So I was in support of that and still am in that general plan up there. Because that's what it was. But keep in mind for me, you know, I'm coming from a place. We just approved, as you know, last year, a new general plan for the lower valley, and I live in an area of unincorporated Weaver County. Where my area where I live hadn't been touched for 50 years. And so it was really something to finally get something adopted. And so I sustain that general plan. I still think it's a good general plan. And I think from 7 years ago, that's strongly what the people wanted to do up there. So that's kind of my little history as I remember it till now. So.
All right, so Charlie, do you want to just give the basics of the general plan in terms of density, in
Sure.
terms of transferring density to the village concept that's been approved? And really the basis behind that,
Yeah.
this versus where the general plan has indicated they wanted to go back in 2017.
Yeah, so in 2000, it was actually 16. In 2016, we did a density analysis to determine what the build out of the valley floor would be. And the number that we came up with was about 16,000 total dwelling units. And I want to make sure we're very clear with the planning commission, with the public and county commissioners, with you guys, what that actually means. 16,000 doesn't mean that the county has the authority to not approve those. 16,000 means that those units will exist at some point in time. They are rights that run with the land. And so those rights are coming down the pipeline. Someone is going to build them. And the only way that we stop 16,000 dwelling units from coming to fruition is we buy all the large parcels that could be developed, or we place conservation easements or open space easements or something on all the parcels that could otherwise be developed. Otherwise, we should be looking at those parcels as if they will be developed. That's the foundation of planning. And so as we were looking at 16,000 build out, we knew we already had about 4,000 dwelling units built. And so we knew we had somewhere between 10, 11, 12,000 additional units. Now, at the time, we were also counting some of those resort units. Some of those are up on the hill. And so we thought, well, we should go back and recount. And this last year, we went back and recounted what kind of density rights do actually exist on the valley floor based on current zoning and based off of existing parcel layers, so parcel data. We found that our estimate was low in 2016. And you could actually take out all of the resort units and still get a build out of about 16,000 dwelling units. But we also know that today we're looking at somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 dwelling units have been built. And so that we've had substantial growth. We had a lot of vacant lots in 2016 that have been built on since. And I've got a graphic that actually shows the difference between 2016 and now, built or unbuilt at the time versus built now. That being said, we know that density is coming. It will come to fruition, like I said, unless some of those other things have taken place or will take place in the future. So we have to plan for that. The plan itself, the most ideal outcome of the plan itself, if you read the plan, says that density will be located where infrastructure is located. And so naturally, the idea there is to find a way to take all that density that is spread out all over the open space areas currently, whether you see it or not, it will come to fruition again, and move them into clusters around where density or where infrastructure is. Infrastructure being road, infrastructure being sewer, water, utilities and facilities, so that we're not seeing all the farmland evaporate into 3-acre lots. Basically, that is the vision, that is the goal of the general plan. Now, how to go about making that happen, that's the next question. We know the general plan says the most ideal location for those units is in village centers, and the general plan identified 8 village centers where those density units can be, should be sent to. Eden being one, Newtown and Old Town Eden, Wolf Creek, Liberty, Nordic, East Huntsville, the Snow Basin intersection, so Travers Loop, and 39, and then Old Snow Basin Road intersection is where those density rights should be moved into. So imagine, and then each of those village areas, each of those 8 village areas is an estimated 1/4 mile radius from the center of that village. Now, we didn't go out of our way to identify where the exact center is, but we did draw lines on maps that said, this is an approximate 1/4 mile radius, 1/2 mile diameter. The reason for that measurement is the average human doesn't want to walk more than 1/4 of a mile at a time. And so you go, you drive, you leave your car, you walk in your community, and then you go back to your car, you go home, or whatever it may be. So in terms of land area, we're talking about 8 1/4 mile radius circles to fit a remaining 10,000 dwelling units, 10,000 density points. Needs to go somewhere, and the plan says the most ideal outcome is one of those villages. Now, we haven't identified which one's going to be the biggest one to receive the most amount of points and which one's going to be the smallest one. But we have made some decisions. For example, Old Snow Basin Road and Highway 39. We have recently made a decision that maybe commercial and mixed use development isn't appropriate at that intersection. And maybe that should receive a small amount of density, not a large amount of density. And so that might not even be a village anymore. I'm not sure. But we also know over in Nordic that the Nordic developer had quite a few density rights on their land. And we've already said, well, there's at least 400 or 500 units there that Nordic can do, and maybe they can transfer more in. Okay, so we're starting to make decisions on where units should go. We still have a volume of units that need to go somewhere. Now, in the most perfect world, all of those units go into a village center and the rest of the valley stays open and agricultural and rural, as the plan suggests. Now, I don't think we live in an ideal world. It'd be nice that if we did. But I think realistically, we're going to still see some development out on those farm fields and those open lands. But if we make good and wise decisions in accordance with the plan, we will see most of those units, hopefully 50% of those units, moved into one of these villages. So that's the premise of the plan.
Okay, any questions from the planning commission on that discussion?
I have, I didn't know we were to discuss this evening, but since I brought the topic up early on in my short tenure here, I'll sort of make some observations that I made at that point. I was around when the plan was developed. I think it's a good general plan. I appreciate the huge and widespread effort that went into it. But it's 7 years old now. It has numbers, projections, and we knew going in, they weren't all going to be correct, and we know now they aren't correct, and things have changed. My suggestion was that this general plan, because it's a good framework, but like all good plans and all good planners, and I've been a planner, strategic planner for 40 years, you can't rely on old information. You've got to continually update yourself and look forward and make adjustments if necessary. So with this plan being 7 years old, having a lot of numbers, knowing the numbers have changed, my suggestion was to look at some type of phased update, not a wholesale change, not a giant modification, an update as needed. We know the county has spent money on water and sewer studies from good outside firms. Those are not incorporated in here. We know there is a water and sewer infrastructure efficiency in the valley. We know that's going to have to change. That's not incorporated in here. So my suggestion was to take this good plan, make it better, update the numbers, fix the projections that weren't right, adjust for what has happened. So where I live, within a mile, I know at least 30 homes have been built since this plan was developed on large parcels. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's change, and that's happened around the valley. So things like that in an update, I think, would be looked at. The numbers would be adjusted accordingly. The new information would come into it, and we'd go forward again for a period of time until the next update is warranted.
Okay, anybody else?
Guys, I just want to ask for clarification there, just so I understand. So when we say update in your mind, obviously these are by right. So they're by right currently, like what's in, there's by right to build, and so you're saying it takes quite some time to update, right? So how do we, there's a lot of applications still going, so how would you, in your opinion of what you're suggesting, how do you suggest that happens if there's already a plan in place that we should follow?
Sure, and as I said, I'm looking at this as a good plan, but there's new information. It was partially built on projections and estimates. We already know some of the county planners have told me some of the numbers that they know that have changed and others could be looked at. Those studies that were done and paid for already are not incorporated. And then you go from there and look at the other elements that need updating. And I'm not suggesting, everything stops since they do that. That's an ongoing activity. And if you planned to do it in phases, then you could bring the new information or the new numbers, the updated reality into it quickly. And the rest could be done on a rolling basis.
I have a question, Charlie, so, and I didn't quite hear, but in those 8 villages that you specified, the plan does allow for the economy to let those move, right? It doesn't necessarily say they have to be, to your point, Old Stone Basin Road, that may not be a village. But a village could pop up somewhere else, right? That is supportive of this plan, that if somebody bought, say, 100 acres and somehow infrastructure made sense there, the plan is supportive of what I understand. Would you agree?
So, sort of,
Okay.
and it depends. I'll leave it to the attorneys to say that. The plan does say that if we do transfers should be located where infrastructure is. If someone were to come into the county and say, I'm willing to build the infrastructure to this location, then I think that we can find support in the plan for allowing a village to be located there. I would also urge the planning commission, the county commission, if that's the case, to also focus on a small amendment to that location on the plan, but we can run those concurrently, because I do think the plan does suggest that where infrastructure is, we should be looking at density being transferred there. And it doesn't say how much. It doesn't say what small or how small those lots should be or how big the lot should be. It just says, we love our open spaces. Let's leave them as open as we can. Therefore, when we find those opportunities to cluster and move them from the open spaces into these clusters, we should take those opportunities, is how I understand it. And I just wanted to answer Commissioner Barker's assertion or question, and we've already talked to the commission about running the projection, the numbers updates on the plan. And we wanted to have something before you guys in your work session in August. Just summer didn't work out that way for us. We're hoping we can see something in front of you guys end of September, if not October.
Good. Anything else? Great. Commissioner Bowles, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just one thing I would add to
Go
that. I appreciate the ask to update those numbers and projections, but, and this is probably a no-brainer for you, Charlie, to include the updated infrastructure that's been put in place since the plan, and also planned and funded infrastructure that's coming in the future.
Yeah.
There's a lot of funded infrastructure coming down that's the commission has, committed to the areas. And so I think that would be a good piece to involve as well, because if there's infrastructure planned and or already built, that should be taken into consideration.
Yes, and absolutely. And another component of that update is going to have to be in compliance with new state rules, a new water component to the plan. So we need to be addressing water a little bit more focused than we have in the past. So I think that's it.
That's all I got. Anything else, Commissioner Harden?
Well, just to me too, is I want to make sure in conjunction with this plan, since what's come out is a very intense study by the Division of Water Quality on the nitrate level of Pineview. Many of you have seen that or read it or heard that discussion. And we all know that the nitrate level's rising, and in potentiality, either our grandchildren or the grandchildren of our grandchildren will have to address it. We've taken a more proactive approach as a commission to start addressing that now. It's hard to do that now because it's changed. But what that means is that all the upper valley that are on septic systems, some of those are failing. They're old. I remember hearing discussion on this back in 1990 about some of the failed systems. I didn't even understand what they were talking about. Some of the old families up there would talk about how they know these systems were failing back then, if I had no clue. But hearing that back then and putting it together now, it's making a lot more sense. And so we're paying attention to that. In fact, the ARPA funding, which is the American Rescue Plan funding that we've got here, a disproportionate amount of funding has gone into the Ogden Upper Valley. Right now, we're at 28.9% for those residents up there for the whole county wide, and that doesn't, so if we were to use it proportionately, that would be a disingenuous amount, but it does affect the whole county, because if we put that money towards solving a solution that'll be decades and decades long to do, the byproduct of that will mean that it'll have a positive effect on Pineview moving forward. And so we're mindful of that and where we're putting that infrastructure, especially as it relates to sewer. Water is a whole other topic, but sewer, we want to be able to get ahead of that. And whenever you try to do something, it's a change, and change is sometimes tough for people here. So our goal is to just educate. We listened a lot to those findings, Division of Water Quality. I think that they're good and accurate. I sustain that what that is, and more I get going down the road with learning more and more about septic and things like that. It's I believe it to be real. So we're addressing that through giving money, actually putting that money up there for sewer in the future, because that's the only way to solve it, is to process that. So that's why I wanted to add that in.
Good point. Okay, so I just want to make a couple of points here. First off, I was former member of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, which deals with growth issues and issues across the state. This is nothing new. We're not the only community, county, city, municipality in the state that faces these same situations, which is growth. And the growth really becomes the issue that a lot of people talk about. How do we control growth? I've been asked on a number of occasions, let's stop growth. Well, let's keep in mind, growth is 60%. If you look at the facts, 60% of that growth is what we call internal growth, which is our own kids and grandkids. And do we owe it to our kids and grandkids to give them the opportunity to live in Weber County and choose a place that they'd like to live in? Or do we want to say, let's stop growth? Well, as a person that was born in the Valley 70 plus years ago, that's lived there most of my life, I can say the Valley's changed. The Valley today is not like it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And I tell people when they say, let's stop growth, well, I don't mind the provision of stopping growth. But if we're going to stop that, I'd like to pick the time that we stop it. When do we close the gates? Should it be 1960, 1970, 1979? I could take all those and say there's a cause that we saw when we started seeing the influx of out-of-state people come in the Valley that changed the complexity of the growth in Ogden Valley. Now, that's not anybody's fault. That's growth. That's private property rights that, by the way, that were mandated by state statute to recognize private property rights. Or if we don't recognize those, then we go to court. We spend taxpayer dollars defending a case that we probably don't stand a very good chance of defending when we take away private property rights. If you remember back not too long ago, and I remember it's probably been, when did we go to 1 to 3?
98.
98. There's a lot of us that own property in the Valley, and I had a number of friends, including myself, that had family property up there that we had to take it. At that point in time, we had farm ground that we could put one home per 1 acre. That was taken away. That was a taking to 1 to 3. That was an idea to preserve open space. The intent of that was, let's keep open space. Let's try to keep some of the farm ground that I personally believe very strongly in. Let's give the opportunity for those farmers, landowners in the Valley, not to be forced to develop their property. How do we make sure that we have the opportunity for those people that may own 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 acres, the opportunity to continue farming that? And if you haven't tried farming lately, you'll know that there's not a lot of profit in farming. Where the money comes in is when you sell that property. So how do we encourage the small farmer, the small landowner? When I say small, 50 to 100+ acres, them to preserve that into open space. You do that by giving them the ability to transfer those development rights into other areas. And you make it economically feasible for this not to happen, but to put those density rights, which they have the right now to do. So if you've got 100 acres, you can do 1 per 3, do the math, you could do that. So you drive by, and again, I come from a farming background, most of my time in the valley, and I remember the times in Ogden Valley. Nobody probably in this room will remember this, that nobody really wanted to live in the valley. For those people that come in the last 10 or 15 years, they have a hard time understanding. There was a time that I went through in my career and living there, that people said there were people moving out of the valley because they didn't like the snow. They had no infrastructure. And, they said, why would you people want to live in that area? Well, that's changed. And that's changed because we recognize now that that's a great place to live. But we also need to recognize the reason it's a great spot to live is because we had open space. You could drive through, you could see the deer out in the alfalfa fields. You could see the cows out there. You didn't see a home on every 3 acres or one. You didn't see a home on every 1 acre. So to me, that's what the general plan says, is let's give the opportunity for landowners that currently have rights that we're not going to take away, that we couldn't take away, even if we wanted to. We can't stop growth unless you give me some answers tonight, how we're going to stop growth. I'm not sure that that's within our wheelhouse to stop growth. If you get answers to that, let me know. I'm happy to listen. But right now we're dealing with that, and we're going to then make the decisions based if growth is coming, which we know it is. Then where's the best place to put those people that'll be coming into Ogden Valley and Weaver County? And as we've looked at it from the state perspective, if we looked at it from the county perspective, Governor Cox makes a statement almost on a monthly basis when we have meetings. Good development starts with good infrastructure. Bad development starts with bad infrastructure, i.e. septic tanks versus sewer. We just made a major investment, we can make a major investment in keeping nitrates out of Pine View, in putting areas that then could come into a village area that would have access to sewer and water, and take that out the open space, give the opportunity for those landowners that would like to keep their open space, keep their farms, give them the ability to maintain those and transfer those rights. And I believe in July, and correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, we will, as the county, take a portion of our funds through the rollback tax and give a portion of that to the state Department of Ag with the effort to go out and buy conservation easements and open space. That's our full intent. So, anybody that accuses this commission of not respecting private property rights, open space, and really making sure that infrastructure, Pine View is again, that's a federal asset, but there's water components of that go through Ogden City that affect a lot more people than those in Ogden, than Upper Valley. We need to do what we can to protect that asset, protect the nitrate level in Pine View. We have the ability to do that if we do good planning. So I would just say, keep that in mind as you make decisions. If you don't think that infrastructure is the proper place for growth, I'd like to know sooner than later before we actually make commitments on the sewer up there. I don't think the State Department of Water Quality would agree with that based upon the studies. I don't think a number of agencies that have looked at the nitrate levels in Pine View, the potential nitrate level, and based upon what could go there, would agree with that. But if you've got a different opinion, or if you've got scientific evidence that, hey, you don't believe that nitrates are going into the ground, please come forward and let us know. I think that's information we'd be very willing to accept. But the information we're receiving is based on sound principles. It's based upon not just our viewpoint, it's based on a number of experts, including the sewer study, the water study that we've taken the last, year and a half, 2 years to accomplish. So we're headed down that path. Again, it's your decision as a planning commission to make those final decisions on where we develop, how we develop. But I would say that you need to look very closely at what's the impact on your decisions? What's the impact? Are we giving the opportunity for landowners to not develop or not? Are we giving the opportunity for small farmers to say, look, I want my kids and grandkids, I want to have open space there, I want to keep my alfalfa field, or do I put 50 homes on it? Okay, that's the decision that you're facing right now. And I'd like to know, again, based upon your decision, what your final outcome is. So that's my take on that. Commissioner Hart, anything else you'd like to add? No, it's good. Commissioner Bullock? Okay, any questions with that? I'm happy to answer.
I have a question.
Yeah,
I feel there was a big, for me at least, a disconnect with what you were just saying and anything that we've discussed. I haven't been a part of any discussion about nitrates and whether or not we believe in any of that. That's never come up in any of our meetings. The discussion about whether or not we believe we should put in density points near infrastructure wasn't a part of our discussion. That there's a lot that you were saying that just doesn't connect with any of the meetings that we've had. I think there might be a misrepresentation or a misunderstanding of how decisions were made on the meeting in question, but none of that was involved.
okay, so what was involved?
Oh, for me, so many things. Let's see, starting out, if we're going to discuss this particular decision that was made, and since it was my motion, I'll go ahead and just start off. Starting with, it was a compound proposal, which we've asked for it not to be. So we were asked to make a approval, disapproval on two very different issues within one proposal. One was on architecture standards, one was on a street regulating map. Two different things. As it came up in that meeting, we discovered, to the surprise of many of us on the commission, that in a previous meeting, when there was a compound proposal that we voted on with separate matters, but in one proposal, because it was a compound question and answer, some of our points, specifically tabling an issue, didn't actually get tabled because it was connected with something that was approved. And so the whole thing, it took about, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes of our meeting just discussing that one situation. So with that underlying the issue that now we're discussing another compound proposal of two separate issues, that now if we put forth an answer on one, we know we're tied to the answer of the other one automatically. So that was one issue, just that alone. We discussed multiple times. We really wish this was two separate questions,
Okay.
so that we could vote on one and not the other, or vote on one and vote differently. So that was one issue. Let's see. I'm losing my track. So I think a lot of people on the way my memory is, and I recently went through all of the minutes and re-listened to the whole meeting. I don't think there was a lot of issue with the architecture proposal. There was a little bit of tweaking here and there that was requested, but by and large, that probably, if it was a separate issue, would have passed. The questions had to do with the street regulation map. There was a lot of information presented. We had a lot of public input. The public input was unanimous. The public input, to me, very much seemed valid. It had to do with needing more information on floodplains. It had to do with needing more information on traffic. It had to do, let's see, I've got notes. It had to do with public notice. Multiple people brought up that Old Town Eden, when they had a street regulation thing go through, they had a in the valley public meeting where residents in that area got to come, get educated, and give their opinion. And the Newtown area did not. And in fact, even though we had a good show up of that meeting, almost every one of them said, I just learned about this. I got a call at 2:30 this afternoon. And that's a problem across the board in a number of ways, whether it's marketing of meetings, but also people just don't pay attention to what's on the agenda. There's responsibility on both ends of that. But the point was that people brought up was that, well, Old Town Meeting got a public meeting in the valley where we could turn up. We didn't. And so as part of our findings, we discussed not being supported by the public, not right at this time. And separately, when we went and went into giving reasons for our vote, I know in particular, I said very specifically, I'd like to see these two things broken out and come back. I would like to have more public notice. I would like to have a meeting in the valley, the way that Old Town Eden did. These were all, I think they're reasonable. Had nothing to do with, I don't believe in growth. I'm not closing the door to anything. It has nothing to do with nitrates. It just simply had to do with that meeting. We were doing an ordinance amendment, had nothing to do with the development plan that we still have not seen. It's simply about an ordinance amendment that was not supported by the public and needed to be better looked at. So I hope we can look at it and then it can come back.
Okay. Good point. What else?
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
I would add to that, and I agree with what was just said. That when I watched the subsequent work session that you all had, I learned a whole lot more about the whole matter than I learned at the meeting that we had on the topic. So, you know, you all had an opportunity to hear things that we didn't. That was the first thing. Second thing, and again, I'm the newest person on this commission. I wasn't involved when these street regulating plans were first developed. I learned that they were sort of a, I'll say guess, educated guess, I guess. And now there's a real project that's made this request. But there's 3 empty corners right there. Actually, 2 are empty, 1, I guess, may be redeveloped. So what went through my mind that night, for sure, right away was, well, how many times are we, this commission, going to be asked to change the regulating plan? Is it going to be every time a new development comes to one of those other corners? Or is this it? I mean, this is new territory for sure, so I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. So in my mind, I was lacking information for sure. Watching your work session, I gained some insight, but I didn't gain the insight into how many times this is going to get reworked when those other corners come up for development. And as was just said, there was no meeting or call out to say, all right, who's interested in Newtown and the way Newtown is going to roll forward, let's get together and lay that all out. That didn't happen. And so I think the way with the 2 conjoined matters that were not at all, shouldn't have been conjoined, plus the lack of information, plus the lack of public support, it didn't surprise me at all that there could be no positive outcome for the request.
Okay, good to know.
How do we, voting no, take away rights from people? Property rights, because this is already in place, the old one.
Right.
And so we're not taking anything from anybody. You can do this or anybody can do this. And so I don't understand how we're taking it away. And this was built off of the master plan.
Yeah, I
So
think,
we're following
I
that.
think the answer to that is the revision that came about from John Lewis to basically take that plan and add a section to it. In terms of what he would propose on a section of that versus what that plan said, basically move some of that density
Yeah,
around.
bigger. And then the other thing, I think I would like to see us spend some time on Wolf Creek. At least map out what's there, so we can see what kind of commercials already up there and how it fits in its bubble.
Okay.
Because that's kind of spreading out. We don't know where the boundaries, we're making an old town, team, a new town into a 1 town, and Wolf Creek's coming down on it. And if we're gonna try to have these bubbles, or maybe we're not, but we don't know the boundary of that Wolf Creek yet.
Okay. Okay, good point.
I'm gonna piggyback on what Commissioner Montgomery said. We do have these 2 village nodes, Old Town and Newtown Eden, and one of my thoughts is that it's starting to kind of sprawl together into one big community, and I think the intent was to separate those and have an Old Town, Newtown Eden. And I do agree with the the sewer for infrastructure, having that infrastructure in is, I mean, it probably needs to happen. So I don't think anybody's gonna argue that the sewer is the right thing to do. You can get water and sewer from pretty much any project over to there if you needed to with pump stations. I mean, it's being brought all the way across the river, all the way up to Wolf Creek. So, I mean, if the infrastructure's in, you can get to it from, if it's not right next to it, you can still get to it. So that was kind of my thought, is it doesn't have to necessarily go right where the infrastructure's at, but you know, quarter mile away, you can get to it fairly easily.
Right, I agree.
And this new town, it's starting to work, like the Sunnyfield, they're starting, the density rates are moving, we didn't take anything from them and it's working, we just have all this other empty spot that's already set up and ready to go, and now we're making a new one. But the infrastructure part of it's great.
Okay. All right, so great questions. Appreciate those. We have authorized planning to separate those two issues for tonight's meeting. Is that correct? And in terms of the street regulating plan, we've asked, and again, it's your decision, that we try to simplify that as much as possible. I think that we confused a lot of people with maybe trying to get too far ahead of what we're really looking at in the future. So what we've asked planning to do is to scale that back. Just look at, again, we like to plan, we like to have I'm gonna say a blueprint in place for the next 10, 15, 20 years, but obviously things can change with that. And as I've learned a long time ago, the market will drive development. We can encourage it or discourage it, but the market will decide what goes where and when. We just need to make the opportunity again for that based upon where infrastructure exists and what makes sense for the valley. I think that's really what we're looking for. So, Jan, you bring up good points. I think the question, Charlie and Rick, is, and I believe that the public needs to have the opportunity to weigh in on this. I wasn't aware that the public didn't have an opportunity, other than, I guess, they had the opportunity here at a planning commission.
There was a public hearing, yeah, but there wasn't noticing to adjacent landowners.
Okay,
It was noticed through the
so I
traditional
think,
means.
I would say it's appropriate that some type of meeting is held in Ogden Valley to discuss that. Talk about this, I mean, a lot's been updated in the last 30 days, if not 2 weeks, in terms of infrastructure potential. And that really needs to be discussed as part of that. So everybody has an understanding of really what we need to do if we proceed with the infrastructure, i.e. water and sewer, and what that means to that area. But I think it's appropriate that the public have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And if that means we have to delay 30 days, 60 days, I'd rather have this done right than look back on it and say, let's change it. And again, you're sitting in those seats because we respect and value your opinion. But we want those opinions based on sound principles. And I could say, speaking for this commission, we believe that the general plan that we have right now, which is to not have this, but to give the opportunities for open space in the future in the valley, makes sense. So that's a personal decision.
Can I add one request? And I'm sorry, I don't know your names. I'm new. I think Commissioner Montgomery.
Yeah.
To your point, about the nodes sort of seeming to merge. From the way Charlie explained it, I would assume then if that's happening, then that would leave more open space around nodes that maybe didn't have that growth.
That wouldn't have
So-
otherwise had it.
Right, so overall, the density in the whole valley would stay the same, so I would just ask the planning commission to address that and maybe add some flexibility to the plan. To where if you see that happening, then maybe those nodes go away or they shrink or whatever, so that.
We don't have to get rid of New Town and Old Town because they're gonna merge and then.
That's what I'm saying, so if they merge and that means that there's gonna be less density somewhere else, then then have a contingency plan. When we see this happening, let's go address this and eliminate, you mentioned another node to the south.
Old Snow Basin.
And I don't know what that looks like. I just think that would be a good thing to address.
How much commercial do we need? There's a bunch right here, and there's some over here, we don't know what's up Wolf Creek. And then we have a
Right,
bunch
I think you
of-
have to know all those pieces for
We could
sure.
Be lopsided on commercial development.
I mean, it needs to be balanced for sure. I just ask that you address that because I think if it's happening naturally in the natural course of the market, you know, then keep that density off of the other places and plan, you know, adjust the plan accordingly. Does that make sense? Am I
It
making sense?
does, it does. There's a really easy answer to addressing the sprawl. It's not the answer anybody wants to hear. You gotta bring it up, because if we're looking at the same amount in a smaller footprint, there's gonna be a height component to that is just not comfortable, I think, for a lot of folks in the valley.
Unless those are merging. Like, and I'm not as familiar with the plan as you guys are, but if you have a node here and a node here. And they have their density and all of a sudden the density comes in between, that's less dense somewhere else.
Right.
Without any height,
Right.
so just. I
The
don't know.
nodes are already created right
Right,
now and
right.
they are separated.
Right,
And the density is right here,
Mhm.
okay, say on this one. So that was designed to keep those nodes away from each other.
Mhm.
You start coming this way and they start to bond.
you make it sound like they're starting to merge and coming maybe down.
With some of the
Wolf
proposals
Creek's
they are.
coming in too, we don't know where Wolf Creek's street regulating plan is, because we haven't addressed it yet.
Yeah, so something you see here, you've got this node right here, then you've got that node right here. It's roughly a quarter-mile radius on each of those. And then we were hoping for some good open space separation between the two with strong trail connections.
Sure,
And then if we could have planned everything out in a street regulating plan, including Wolf Creek, we would see Wolf Creek up in here with some
Sure.
like a green belt around that as well. Now, we know COVID's developing, but we also know that where this development is occurring right here, we're gonna see 2 acre lots with open space surrounding it. And so that might be the right kind of open space. I'm still not sure if I fully understand everyone's sentiment on that. So we might get a nice little belt here, and maybe we could see something like that in here. If we're gonna get true open space out of these green areas, I mean, it's gonna be working with landowners.
yeah.
Correct me if I'm
Anyway,
wrong. We make a lot of this commercial doesn't take density. So we're not finding a place with commercial density or residential density. So now we've got a big circle. It's a lot of commercial, doesn't do anything for the residential.
Yeah. And I think the discussion we had earlier, again, I don't believe that Newtown Eden is gonna turn into a commercial hub anytime in the near future. I'll be long gone before you see. I mean, we all know that the commercial interest in Ogden Valley is gonna be a while out. So what my viewpoint is in the discussion with the planners is let's put this in, again, to a blueprint, but we're not gonna set this in concrete where if somebody comes in and says, look, I really think that we should have a townhome or a multi-mixed use, whatever, in that area. Let's give that allow again, the planning commission, look at that on a case by case basis. I don't think we want to, the last thing we want to do is, I'm not gonna call it zoning, but put that the only allowed uses in that area is commercial, because that may never develop. And again, let the market decide what the market wants. And it's probably not gonna be heavy commercial for anytime soon. I think, and again, with the emphasis talking about Old Town and New Town, by virtue of the plans that we have seen and pretty much agreed to, the intent is to run sewer line over to Old Town Eden, possibly even to the elementary school at some point in time, which will bring in some of that old town. So you'll see if that does take place, development along that sewer corridor. It's just gonna happen that way. And again, that's where we would encourage, whether it's commercial or residential, encourage the development to go. So.
One thing I just would bring up is that using terms like open space, which we have now for many years, means a different thing to everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? And especially people who've been in the valley for a very long time and what they think of the valley, open space is probably not the same as a 2 acre space next to a home.
I would
No.
agree.
I think a lot of people would not agree that that's open space, but so we might want to think about somehow, I'm not tying us down, but defining that in some way. Also, the value of that space, right? So in a recent discussion that we were having about somebody maybe moving density points near the road and then putting all the back pasture in a conservation easement, if that back pasture is not visible or enjoyable by anyone else in the valley, is that open space? You know, if we can't actually see it, but yet it's not developed. So I think just keeping that in mind, that everybody in this room has a different idea of what they think we're talking about. And we might want to flesh that out a little bit so we can just not ruffle people and all get on the same page.
I agree.
We
No,
can-
that's good. And I would like the input from, to me, open space is not what you just described with, 20 homes in
High
front.
density.
And 40, to me, the thing that makes the valley is you can drive down our main corridors, the main highways, and look out, you got a field with, maybe it's got wheel lines in there, maybe it's got cows in there, but off the road, so you have a corridor that doesn't have development on it. And maybe that's along a river corridor that not too many people see, but again, if you can protect those prime areas, your river corridors, some of your, again, the hillsides, the certain hillside, or then we've worked, that's what we did with Nordic. We said, look, we don't want 500 homes up on the hillside. So that's when that came about, that we said the village concept for Nordic probably works because we're not gonna have 500 units sitting up on the hillside, which I think was, again, even though some people weren't happy, but it was the right decision. And again, it's gonna happen when it happens. It's not gonna happen anytime real soon. But you bring up some great points. And
Commissioners, we do have in the general plan an open lands map, which is the one up on the screen here,
yeah,
which can help us, it can help steer our understanding of what open space is. The intention of the plan calls for 10-acre parcels or greater to be preserved. And so I would hope, I
Sorry,
think
say that again?
10-acre parcels or greater
To be
to
preserved.
be preserved as open space. I hope that is a basic that most of us could agree on is at least open space if it's a 10-acre parcel, because it is in the plan, but if not, it's something we should definitely address.
yeah,
Something you see on this map, you see a lot of white spaces in between the green spaces being open spaces. Those white spaces are areas 10 or less than 10 acres. And so those white spaces are areas that may otherwise be primed for additional density because it is right next to a street in most cases. Most of these cases, so something to think about here.
good.
Trevor, you mind if I make a couple comments?
Help yourself.
So I think that I really appreciate you guys meeting with us. I think that is really helpful. I appreciate you making the time and spending time. I know you have a lot to do. This, our valley or the valley of Weaver County Valley is a small facet of what you guys have on your plate. So we very much appreciate you meeting with us. As it relates to this decision, it really comes down to, I think this, there's a couple of facets. One was mentioned that we weren't sure how a decision that was split or changed would be viewed by the county commission. And the reason for that is we had felt over the time, and I've been on this for 2 or 3 years now, so it's been a little while, that some of our recommendations aren't heard accurately. We spend lots of time on it and we do that so that we can hopefully help with the decisions, but they're not being heard or communicated accurately. So I have made an effort as the chair to try and help make our motions better and encourage that we make better motions that are more clear and try and understand what it is that's communicated to you as a county commission so that we can better understand or better assist. And as it relates to this decision, it did come up that we felt, there was another instance where we felt that we weren't heard exactly how we had addressed it. And so there became a concerted feeling that maybe we need to change the way we're communicating, right? Maybe doing partials isn't being heard. And I think there's a few things that we can work on. And you Commissioner Bowles mentioned that we should revisit the plan and kind of help, put that together. We don't make we don't make any decision on what's on the agenda. We have tried, and it seems that we either get set back, like we might say, hey, we want to revisit the plan, and we get told, no, we can't really do that. And so we just kind of follow what's going on. And that's kind of the hard part that we're in. So I hope you can understand that. We don't really know what's coming. So we might ask, for example, the sign that we talked about, that one we asked for a revisit and, we never got to do that. So we have a heartburn there where we don't make those types of decisions. So having us relook at it, we're not doing that. Just because we're trying to do everything that we're asked, but we basically get told. And I listened to, as it was communicated in the meeting, and whether it by omission or by just not saying it, because we look at the general plan and we want to follow the general plan. And, as I say, it relates as it currently is, and it's a decision that's made, but it kind of feels wrong to say that we didn't want to follow. You mentioned it, but we agree with everything you said, and as Commissioner Wampler mentioned, we want to follow infrastructure, follow the plan, but we also want to make sure that it fits with the community's feeling of, how that plan should be implemented, the details, right? And that's what we're trying to look at, trying to make a decision. And I think there's a genuine disconnect between what we are communicating and how you're hearing it, basically. And I hope if we can come, I don't know what the right answer is, but I would really like to help. I'd like to see that get better. And I think one way is to reduce the items on the here, what we'll get is we'll get a packet this big of changes, and we'll have to go through every single one and try and make adjustments to every one. And for example, the maps that were outlined, here's an example of this, is the maps that were provided in this, when this came out, there was 4 of them. And I asked repeatedly that we should have the original in there as a reference and or an option. And those were never included until the meeting. It was in the presentation. And I feel that that's just a disservice to us, that we're trying to follow what's been put there. And as a simplistic view, if we had that in the packet, we could say, hey, well, here's the original. We want to make this small change. And we can easily outline it in meetings. And those are some of the things that we have hard time with, is trying to communicate to you the complexity, especially when it's this big, full of lots of little changes that make a big difference. Every little thing. And so one thing I think that could help us, if you could help direct the planning division to help us have a little bit clearer, every little change maybe needs to be its own thing, so we can better communicate, because it's not very easy to communicate, because it might be real good on one side and hard on the other, but if we don't get it, and the way it can be communicated to you is they're good with the whole thing. Well, hold on a minute. We're not good with this little part. We're good with the rest of it. So anyway.
Fair comment. So what would you think if we set up a monthly meeting or as needed basis, that you sat down with one of the commissioners, probably being me, since that's in my portfolio, and had that discussion prior to the meeting, just so clear, so you have the opportunity, and who's your vice chair?
Commissioner Burton.
So I'd say the chair and the vice chair meet with us, meet with me and the other commissioners if we need to, then it becomes a public meeting, just to look at the agenda, answer your questions. I guarantee you that Rick and Charlie would be okay with that. Absolutely. One thing we have to have is good communication. And I think that's really why we're at the point we are now. There probably has been a breakdown in communication. I think, some of that obviously is our fault. Again, we drink from the fire hose almost on an hourly basis, so sometimes we do lose sight of certain things, but we try to catch up to them eventually. But I think that might be an opportunity for us to sit down prior to, so that you're better informed of what's coming about. If you've got some suggestions, let's listen to them. And as far as I'm concerned, if you wanted to bring in any other commissioners with you, that's great with me.
I think that would be great. Much appreciated. Like I say, we know you've got a lot to do, and we're just trying to help, but it's so hard to say, hey, this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing, in a massive group of changes.
Well, you guys got a tough job, and your decisions are gonna impact a lot of what that valley looks like in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And I would say from our viewpoint, we want to have that valley be the best for future generations as well as those that live there. But we need to make sense of those decisions we make. Understanding that, what growth's gonna come, and let's just deal with the growth, let's come up with the best decisions. That are out there today, which I guarantee you guys are smart enough. Invested enough in the community up there that those decisions will be made. In the proper manner, so. With that, Chris, did you have, we're out of time, sorry for taking.
Just a couple of comments real quick. As far as addressing compound issues, I don't see anything that would legally prohibit you from separating out issues on legislative items. If it's a applicant driven request, I would say you know, try to
Yeah.
expedite it.
Right.
As far as administrative items, I would say if it can all be contained in one land use application, it should be dealt with as one item. And so I would hope that those compound issues would be naturally separated out on administrative items. But as far as legislative items, I think we can separate those out.
So are you speaking to the planning officer, or you're speaking to us?
I'm just speaking to everyone. I'm just giving a general observation.
Well, so I just want to make sure, it's a sticking point with me that, you know, to use legislative terms, I'd like to vote on a clean bill. I'd like to vote on one thing and then go to the next topic and vote on that. And what happened in that meeting that really ruffled some feathers was that the rules, as I'll just speak in personal terms, that as I understood it. So for example, we are a recommending body for the county commission. And if we put forth a decision, whether affirmative or against, then they will make a final decision and we're just a recommending body. But if we, because of various reasons, decide to table an issue, it's kind of paused for a minute so that we can receive whatever it is we're looking for. And then we can put forth either affirmative or negative response. In the compound issue that happened, we separated it as we were instructed that we were allowed to do.
Okay.
We said, yay to this, hold this, this is tabled. But because we had said yay to part, the whole thing moved forward and got decided on, and we were swept aside. And so as we're learning this, we were dealing with another compound issue where yet again, we felt, well, this is fine. And in the effort to get things done, this is speaking for me, I can approve this. This over here, I'm not ready to approve. But we had just learned that if we had tabled that item, it wouldn't have been tabled had we put that forward. So then that's why I said, I'm not messing with this. You know, Charlie kept saying, you can separate. I was like, I'm not going down that road again. The whole thing's together. And I put forth a motion to reject with the stipulation. I'd love it to come back separate. But because of what we've learned in the past and what was affirmed between the director and Charlie, I very specifically said, I'd like to clarify. It's in the minutes. I'd like to clarify. Is this what you're saying? Yes, that's what I'm saying. So it can be simply solved by every proposal put forward. Make it a clean bill. Vote on the architecture, separate Z line item. Vote on the street regulating plan. That way we can say, yes, hang on. No, you know, that type of thing. I think it's easy to solve.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just gonna require some internal communication, sitting down with like, what's the procedure that we want to set up when that happens? So that if there is a segregation between the issues where one actually stays, that other recommendation goes forward, and then that other item can be addressed separately.
Yeah, and Chris, I think what you're seeing or what you're hearing here is the difference between a county initiated text amendment and an applicant initiated text amendment. Because we sent the full application to the county commission first. Whereas if it's county initiated, it's easy to separate.
We'll probably have to sit down and come up with some actual specifics of how to address those. Just so that we can predict, so that everyone is on the same page when this issue happens again.
I think that's right.
Yeah, as far as the legality, I think it's totally fine to separate out issues. The only other thing that I wanted to mention was, and I don't know what the right solution is for this, but just to keep it in the back of your mind, is with regard to notice. State statute sets the minimum, it doesn't set the maximum, the minimum amount of notice that is required. I think, if I remember correctly, our ordinance goes a little bit further and provides another public hearing, so 2 public hearings, is that right?
That's correct.
So there's nothing that prohibits you from doing more. I hesitate to say, okay, we're gonna go out and have a meeting out in the valley with this item without any rules. or something in ordinance that says that's what you're going to, that you should do that. Because the question comes up, I don't know at what point, how much notice is sufficient to stop the conversation, move it forward to a decision. And so it's just, my concern is a lack of guidance. Because my question is, if we do it with this one, what are we gonna do with the next one that comes up? Where someone's gonna come back and say, well, you're giving different notice than you gave to this item, but we're going above the minimum required by state statute.
Then you
It's just a
accuse of preference.
discussion, I think, in the future for the groups to sit down and say, how much notice is appropriate? And to also keep in mind that I'm always trying to figure out what the forecast is for the legislature of what they're going to do to land use law. And so the forecast has been showing as of late, at least what we've seen with the last bills that came out, is they're trying to expedite the process, applications getting through. And so we're having restrictions around turnaround time. And we get penalized if we don't turn them around. And so I fear if we don't put some boundaries on it, some concrete boundaries, we're going to get a pushback from the state who's going to make it even harder. So just some consistency. I don't know what the answer is. I agree. I think notice is very important. I think public comment is very important. Informed decisions. I just don't know at what point we stop, or just because there's no guidance. If I was asked what the legal requirement is, according to our ordinance, public hearing before the planning commission, public hearing for the county commission, that satisfies due process.
Is it not, it sounded like there was a precedent already set that's happened with Old Town Eden. Can we not follow
It's
that?
not legally binding. That's the problem that I'm running into, is we're going off something that's not in code.
Yeah.
And so if we want to add more notice, we need to sit down and we'd probably bring in the other planning commission, the other interested parties, and just say, okay, what's an appropriate amount that respects the rights of the applicants to have an expedite, a quick decision, but also gives the opportunity for you to have all of the information necessary to make an informed decision. And what that answer is, I don't know.
And I think that's a notice provision we need, the part that concerns me is if we did that with Old Town Eden, to me, it's fair that we do it with Newtown. Now, again, and Chris is exactly right. We tread a pretty fine line because the legislature, bless their hearts, taken a very aggressive attitude on property rights, on zoning. They're already started to legislation that would take rights away from counties, political subdivisions, i.e. counties and cities, to make zoning decisions. That's that path, that horse is already out of the barn. And so we have to be, again, we're treading that to make sure that we don't necessarily want the state to come in and say, somebody has to go to the state for a decision, or the state tells us what we want to do. They already give us a lot of mandates that dictate what we can do. But it's gonna get, after this next session, we'll see more and more control by the state to take that away from political subdivisions, i.e. counties and cities. So,
Can I add something to that?
yeah,
And this is my own personal feeling. If we're being good actors, which I think we are.
Yeah.
Then that's not gonna
That's-
affect us. It's when entities aren't being good actors that they're gonna really feel that from the legislature. So I appreciate the thought and process that you all go through and our planning department, because it keeps us from being afraid of that.
no,
If we're being good actors, we don't have to be afraid of that. They're not trying to
No.
force anything on the good actors.
no, exactly right. So again, it comes down to private property rights. They're advocates to the extent that, hey, we want to make sure that we don't get complaints from private landowners that cities and municipalities, counties aren't taking away our rights. Because that's when they get involved. That's when they tell us you can't do that. They see lawsuits come about because private property rights have been denied, and they get those lawsuits. Somebody sits down there at the county or the state and says, okay, I'm gonna fix it. I'm not gonna give political subdivisions the ability to make that decision. Then your rights go away, our rights go away, the state takes control, which I think, again, I've always said this, the best decisions are made at a local level, not necessarily the state. And coming from a former state position, it's a little hard to say that, but I think that's after being in this chair for 4 years, I would agree. And we get very tired of mandates that require us to do certain things without our ability to push back to a certain extent. So with that, but Commissioner Bowles is exactly right. We have to recognize both sides. And that's all that we would ask you to do, is look at both sides of the equation, make the right decisions, which I've got fully faith and confidence they do those. And let's make sure that the communication improves from this day forward. And Chris, we'll work through the notice requirements and whether that's a public meeting here. But I just feel that we owe it that to the public if it wasn't heard. And again, I don't want to zap the rights of any applicant, but it's probably makes sense that we at least review that street regulating plan in the future. And again, with the idea that I'm not prepared to say, look, let's commit X number of acres, X street to only commercial. I think we need to have some flexibility in that plan to adjust to what the market conditions are the next 10, 20, 30 years. So,
Benefit to you is we don't have an only commercial,
yeah.
so it's all mixed use if it's, if it's a commercial
Yeah.
area.
And I think that's really what we said is look, if somebody comes in with residential request, we can look at that. If somebody comes in with small commercial, we can look at that. So I think we probably have that flexibility. We just need to communicate that so everybody's on the same page. Does that make sense? Commissioner Hardy, famous last words. None? Commissioner Bowles.
Said mine.
Rick, Charlie, anything you want to add?
Just one thing, we did meet with the chair and the vice chair before the meeting, to talk about the agenda, so we can invite you to that meeting, and that would probably address a lot of it.
That works for me, but more in advance. Okay, yeah, I think we need to have an opportunity that we don't do it the hour before.
Yeah.
I think we need to do that. Maybe, 2 or 3 days, maybe a week before, whenever.
We could invite the whole, well, we can't invite the whole commission, right?
No, you can't. But we could do what we do with Western Weaver, because we meet with the Western Weaver, because we're meeting with you right on that Monday, but we could just move you to the following week and do it then. And it's worked great with Western Weaver.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Going once, going twice? Hey, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I think it was important you sit down that you understand first off that we respect what you do, we respect your decisions, and we trust what you do. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Trevor.
You know,
Trevor, we'll need to wait till 6 to start the regular meeting.
okay, so we noticed the work session till.
We have an hour in between?
Because Owl's notice, we were expecting this.
Oh, I didn't realize.
We can talk for longer. Yeah, how do we do that? So. Stop sharing.
Charlie, that's the end of the meeting.
It's the end of the work session.
And we're not on the next agenda.
Okay, I'm talking about.
No, I mean, we're not on the meeting after this, so we're gonna leave.
Okay.
So, thank you guys for your time.
Could you keep the party favors?
You guys can, yeah. Just, oh, no, I didn't do yourself, please.
Oh,
You
you want him back?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Got it, you guys. Right, thank you.
Absolutely.
QR code that people are coming in, you just scan and then get a copy of the packet.
100%. Yeah, nice and easy. We did that with the general plan process. So what did I hear from you on? I didn't really understand on what we should be doing on or can't do on. No. That's not an issue. It's an issue for somebody. You know. So this is the rub.
We're gonna start at 6, whether they're here or not. Absolutely.
Closings. Okay, well, let's get started with the pledge. of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, well, we have all commissioners in attendance with the exception of Commissioner Burton, who is excused. We have a couple adjustments or requested adjustments to the meeting minutes dated 5/23/2023. Commissioner Wampler, and I believe you put that in an email pretty well. Do you think we could just send that to Marta to have those adjusted?
I have sent them to Marta. She mentioned she would. They're not reflected here, but if we can, in the verbiage, say that.
And while we're on that, maybe we should bring that up with Rick as a concern that they were so far off. Corrections. With that, we have a consent item and on the agenda tonight and a legislative item. Getting to. So. Is there anyone on the commission or the audience who would like to pull an item from the consent agenda for discussion? If not, then I will entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda, subject to staff recommendations.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving into item number 3, legislative item, public hearing to consider the county initiated ordinance amendment to implement waterwise landscaping. Rick, would you mind describing the decision?
Yeah, this is a legislative item. You'll be forwarding a recommendation on to the county commission. You will need to have a public hearing with this. You'll need to open and close the public hearing with a motion. And Mr. Burton is going to be presenting this item.
Hello, planning commissioners. Nice to be with you tonight. We held a work session on this item back in June, just before bringing something to you officially as in a public hearing. We wanted to make sure to give you a heads up about this so we could, and we got some feedback from you at that meeting. That was good. But this is kind of the first step in the process to bring it forward through both planning commissions to get some kind of recommendation, moving it forward to the county commissioners. This is, as Director Grover stated, this is a county initiated amendment. We've been given some direction from the county commission to look at implementing as a possibility, implementing some of the Weber Basin recommended landscaping restrictions. The reason behind the proposed changes is because the county commission would like residents in the unincorporated area to be able to take advantage of some of the financial incentives that Weber Basin through the state of Utah is offering to people. And so the changes that are proposed are not anything, I want to make sure I'm clear, they're not anything that's being mandated by the state. We're not being told we have to adopt these, but if the county would like would like its residents in the unincorporated areas to participate in some of these financial incentives, then Weber Basin has stated that we have to adopt some minimum restrictive landscaping standards. So what this ordinance does, the proposed changes take any allowance or requirement for planting turf grass And it changes those to be in compliance with the requirements that Weaver Basin suggest. So very short, you'll see, I'll zoom out a little bit here so you can see just a couple of pages is all. This section 108.14 is referring to the county's design review requirements. Design review applies to commercial projects. It applies to manufacturing projects, particularly manufacturing projects in the Ogden Valley, not manufacturing projects in the Western Weber County. It applies to institutional uses, things like multifamily as well, where we should have some kind of landscaping requirements. The developer should, make the building and the site look pretty reasonable and presentable, as recommended by the Planning Commission and as the county commission sees fit. So this specific section, it had a reference to turf grass. It said that you can do no more than 50% of the landscaping as turf grass in order to change our codes the way that we would need to for this incentive to apply. We're just taking out that requirement and referencing this new section below that I'll go to. This next section 108.25 applies to the architectural, landscape, and screening design standards for commercial projects and manufacturing projects and institutional projects and multifamily projects. Previously, it talked about, and it still does talk about, you have to have minimum of your site be 20% of it has to be landscaped. Previously, we were saying there had to be a certain amount of actual living plant materials. Living plant materials, as you might imagine, a lot of times require watering. And so proposing to eliminate that. And then also we had a maximum turf grass area, maximum of 50% of the total landscape area shall be, it previously said, planted in turf grass. The proposal just, again, eliminates that line and refers to the new maximum turf grass allowance.
And this is just institutional, industrial,
Manufacturing, multifamily.
multifamily.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with residential.
No.
Okay.
There is a section below about single family residential that I'll go over, but this page is specifically not single family residential. Park strips for commercial projects. It talked about having a native grass mixture that's low growing, and talking about how automatic watering was required. This specific, I'll read these lines 28 through 33. All park strips shall be landscaped with this 6-inch angular rock that's not coming from Weber Basin. That is as the county staff has looked at with the county engineer, a cross section for commercial and manufacturing projects like this. We certainly don't want there to be any watered grass, but what makes sense in that area, what we've come up with is 6-inch angular rock. You may be familiar with the county building up here near our parking lot. There's an example of what 6-inch angular rock looks like. County engineer, county planning staff feel that it's a reasonable thing to require of these projects to have in there. And we do allow someone to plant some shrubs and grasses and flowering plants in there, although it's not mandated. So somebody could just do rock, and we feel it could look pretty nice. That is not something that's not something that is a requirement of Weber Basin for these incentives. It's just, we wanted to make sure to implement that as we feel that would be a good park strip design. All planning shall be maintained by the landowner in compliance with 108.7.030. We want to make sure that they're keeping their plantings down so that if there is an intersection, that it's not going to cause a visibility issue. This subsection 3, in subdivisions where trees are required to be installed within park strips, the landowner is required to install a drip system with drip emitters rated at 5 gallons per hour or less. That is Weber Basin recommends a drip system that uses low water, and they've said 5 gallons per hour or less, is what's recommended there. This next these next requirements again are also those manufacturing commercial uses. This doesn't apply to single family. It's talking about plant materials. Previously it talked about ground cover may be used in place of turf grass. We felt that it made more sense to just say to meet landscaping area requirements. We propose to eliminate some language that just says drought tolerant is strongly encouraged, where we're actually requiring that now. It might not make sense to say it's encouraged. So these next lines are just getting rid of some of those language, some of that language that doesn't really have any teeth in it. Again, referring to commercial manufacturing projects, our code talked about shrubs and ground cover in areas between parking and the street. It said that grass was an option. We want to make sure that it isn't an option unless it complies with the new section below. And then this is the last part. This is that new section that does implement the Weber Basin requirements for these incentives. So the new section 108.712 waterwise landscaping, the following waterwise landscaping standards apply to all new development. So there is a section specifically related to single family dwelling, single family residential subdivisions in this, and it's A. In single family residential developments, no more than 35% of the front and side yard of a lot or parcel, and no more than 3,000 square feet of total lot area may be irrigated turf grass. Now I want to mention the requirement from Weber Basin for this incentive is specifically no more than 35% of the front and side yard of a lot or parcel. It does not cover this next section. That is something we've added in speaking with the Western Weber Planning Commission. They made comments, that one of their comments was in that planning area, they feel that they're in a desert, and a few of the planning commissioners wanted to restrict the actual number of square feet that could be planted in irrigated grass. What the planning commission ended up recommending, I'll just mention this to you, so it's just a little piece of information. The Western Weber Planning Commission ended up recommending, rather than saying so 35% of the front and side yard and no more than 3,000 square feet, they ended up just saying or whichever gives them more landscaping is what they ended up going with. So as proposed, just as a suggestion, we were wondering, what if the county wanted to limit the number of square feet? That's certainly an option. Happy to take your recommendation, whatever that may be. Moving on to commercial, industrial, institutional, and multifamily developments. This is a specific requirement of Weber Basin for this incentive. No more than 15% of the total landscaped area may be irrigated turf grass. This provision shall not apply to active recreation areas that meet the design and landscape standards of Weber Basin Water Conservancy District. So if there's a park, and obviously you need grass a lot of times in parks, it may make sense to allow that as an exception. Last line, irrigated turf grass in a park strip and any other area with a width of less than 8 feet is prohibited. So that is applying it to all new development, including single family. Under this proposal, no one would be able to place turf grass in a park strip or on an area that has a width of less than 8 feet. The general plan, you might have read my staff report, there is a sentence in the general plan that says that the county will consider ways to conserve water. I don't know that that means that you need to do something like this, but that's the general plan mentions it. And my recommendation is that you consider it, and that whatever your recommendation is, that you have some findings and forward that to the county commission. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Steve, so if I understand this correctly, all of these are what you've written here. So like, for example, if I was applying to make a change to my house, none of these would apply on a personal level, other aside from 108.712.
Would you say make a change to your house?
So let's say I wanted to apply for Well, let's say I wanted to make an added development unit that I have on my yard. And because we know that you're grandfathered in, correct? But now I'm making a change, but I'm adding a second home to my lot. And I happen to have a park strip. This would make that illegal, right?
That's a good thing to bring up. I don't, it would make what illegal?
Having that park strip at all. So I say I have a lot with 6 acres in Ogden Valley. And I have a home on 3, and now I'm gonna add another one. When I come in to get approval, you're gonna tell me that I'm not in compliance because of the new changes, if this were to pass.
We may need that. I appreciate you bringing that up. I don't think that's the case because your lot is not necessarily new development. And you would, if the ordinance is, if, let's say that, it sounds like you're talking about an accessory dwelling unit possibly on your property.
Let's say that I'm dividing it from 6 to 3.
Yeah, dividing it would be considered new development and it would apply to the new lot that you create.
Yeah, so if I'm a family with 30 acres and I want to put my 10 kids on it, I would now be responsible for doing the entire block to get rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to get started. I mean, that's pretty substantial. So you mentioned a few times that this doesn't apply to homeowners aside from the last section. Is that correct?
That's correct. Unless, excuse me, it doesn't apply to single family lot homeowners, single family lot owners, except for this last section.
But let's say I have a business and I wanted to put something in, I would basically be required to put 6-inch angular rock. Is that right?
If your business is considered new development and there was nothing on the property before and
What if I'm changing uses, just conditional uses?
it doesn't consider that to be new development.
That doesn't? Okay. Interesting.
So
Is this coming from Weber Basin Water District? Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I just was getting a little nervous because that wasn't written anywhere.
And I think,
So unless you're gonna stand up and argue his case, if that was the case, of a different conditional use or whatnot, it might be considered. It's not written that it's not.
Yeah.
So
we may need to get in and that may be a finding as a result of this meeting is to get in there and actually specify what new development is. I don't know that we actually do yet, but I can
Yeah.
look into it.
And the next question is does it apply when Weber Basin looked at this? Was it catered to Ogden Valley or is this just because they service more than Ogden Valley?
Right. It was not, they did, my guess, and I don't know, but my guess is they did not specifically look at the different climates in the different areas of.
Yeah, because I mean, there's
Utah.
obviously bigger lots up in Ogden Valley than in some of the other areas of in unincorporated Weber County. And if that's a general for everywhere they service, there's a lot more park strips in residential neighborhoods, say down in lower Weber County. And there's not really many park strips up in Ogden Valley.
Sure.
Rick, I had asked that maybe if somebody from Weber Basin could come here and explain maybe that exact situation. And maybe give us background why there is this quid pro quo for participation. Was that able to happen? So I assume,
We've reached out to Weber Basin, but we haven't heard back from them.
So did they know there was a public hearing tonight?
Steve, do you know if they knew about the public hearing? But before we get to that, have you heard anything back from them?
I've gotten some comments back from them,
Okay, you did.
but nothing that says yes or no, this meets everything we're asking for.
Okay,
It's more of, I just got the email like probably an hour or two ago. I didn't know that maybe I
yeah, and I didn't understand that either, that you wanted Weber Basin here at this meeting, but
It
we
just
can-
made sense to me if they're seeking a quid pro quo and we do, as was mentioned, have a completely different environment, different weather system than out in Western Weber and the rest of the county, that maybe they could address that since they came up with this general framework.
I know we did want to get information from them, but we haven't heard about, because you guys mentioned in the work session that you didn't want this applied to the Ogden Valley. And we haven't heard back from them on that because we wanted to find out if we don't have it part of the Ogden Valley, are we still going to be able to allow, are they going to still give the incentives to Western Weaver folk? We haven't heard back on that.
So, and I want to be clear before I read this in from the EPA. I'm all for water and being water wise, but the EPA, Steve, my question in the work session was urban island heat effect, right? We take a grassy area, we take our farm grounds that are up there, subdivide them, we put black roads on them, we put asphalt shingles. You have such a minimal amount of grass, and I get we're 3 acres on most where we're at in the valley. But in urban, if this is in a public, their urban heat island, the effect increases energy costs, air conditioning, air pollution levels, heat-related illness, and even mortality. So I think I would just love to hear from how they're the smart ones, right? And so I want to know with them suggesting sounds like if we're creating, are we solving one thing because they don't want as much water going out to then compound a whole nother issue? Like, I think that's something we really need to look at, and they need to be able to explain. Maybe we don't understand, and I think that's fine. But I mean, my undergrad, my grad, they talked all about this, that we need more plants. It doesn't have to be irrigated, but kind of feels like the angular rock. That's not a big deal, but again, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And again, angular rock wasn't from Weaver Basin.
No, I understand. I'm just saying the idea of the urban island heat effect, where again, we're taking out everything and you're putting in something that holds a lot of heat, which is a
Yeah.
rock.
And we could easily remove the rock.
Well, it's just then what you're going to put in, because it's someone going to want to put in like a drive, like a wildflower mix in a park strip right here. It might not make a lot of sense, but I just mean, there's got to be give and take. Right?
And there's other options. I mean, typically a weed doesn't germinate if it doesn't see sunlight by the time it's 2 inches out of the ground. If you go 3 inches of mulch in those areas, that can accommodate that.
So like, that's my biggest issue is all this, like, I definitely don't support, and I'd love to talk more after the public hearing, but I think we're different. I think we're just different in the valley than down. I think Western Weaver, you're talking 1/4 acres, so 3,000 square feet. It's a lot of grass. When you're talking 3 acres, all of a sudden, now what happens? Like, I hate managing my 2.5 acres of grass. It's hard, but looks good. I like it more.
Then the other concern I have with this is, we've been conserving water lately as a state. And now all of the water companies are realizing that they don't have any money in their coffers because they were paid for usage, and all the rates have gone up. So we've not only saved water, but now we're charging ourselves more. And what happens when we want to revert back to, the fad maybe of 6-inch angular rock becomes no longer the in thing, and we want something else? We're going to pay a fortune for it because we decided to change all the rates. And so, I mean, I think I still stand in the same place we were in the work session, in that we don't want to change our adaptation rules at all. We want to leave them how they are.
It would seem to me, and just in our last session hearing how good the Ogden Valley general plan is, that it talks all over the place in there about rural character and maintaining the natural state. And the natural state is not rocks, and it's green up there most of the year. And so I would consider this proposal contrary to the general.
So do I have a motion to open the general or the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Please come forward and make your comments and please keep them to about 3 minutes. And if you speaking for a group, please let us know.
Anna Francis. I don't know if I can do 3 minutes. Okay. So Ogden Valley, you're right. It's different than even Western Weber County. The pioneers came in, they explained the grasses were as tall as the horses, wildflowers everywhere, greens, tons of springs up there. everywhere you go, rich with water and the beaver. So, yeah, it'd be definitely changing the habitat and all what the valley is. I don't know how, if any of you caught my editor's view in the last issue of the paper on saying no to county's efforts or to eliminate, or water companies' efforts to eliminate green space. And the last national conference for the American Planning Association I went to in California, went to a session on that. And I knew this about the science, that heat islands and blacktops, roofs, rock, others that collect the heat actually contribute to droughts. The higher temperatures make the cloud cover pass over an area, they don't release the water. And so you're actually contributing, and there's tons of journal articles, there's our universities throughout the United States and all over the world have researched this, and the less green space you have, it does contribute to the droughts. And we know that green space lowers blood pressure, lowers heart rates, decreases anxiety, improves overall mental health and physical health, cleans the air we breathe, cleans surface waters, even in urban areas. When I walked up here to move my car back down to the lower parking lot, the 6-inch rock, I walked by and I just noticed all that heat coming off of that rock. And the few plants they have thrown in there, they're dying because you get all that heat that they're having to contend with. The trees, limbs are looking pretty sad. And I felt sad for the trees and the plants. And then there again, you don't get the grassy area to clean the wastewater or flood, or not flood, but when you have water coming off it, grass spaces clean that. They support the underground aquifers, minimize drought conditions, minimize flooding, slows evapotranspiration, the process by which water moves from land surfaces to the atmosphere via evaporation and transpiration. Protects biological diversity, cools the environment, cools and moderates the impact of urban heat islands, composed of rooftops, blacktop, concrete, rock, and other non-green materials. And I also wanted to note that it has been shown, well, a statement I took for the article from a turf organization that supports turf, that the bad rap they're getting. And they've shown that turf doesn't have to necessarily take as much water as we're thinking of, okay? It only needs, and let me see if I can find where that says this. I'm sorry, I had notes and I forgot them on my printer, and so I had to grab the article from the paper. It says that we should encourage people to accept dormant lawns in the height of summer. Just 1/4 inch of water every 4 to 6 weeks will keep grass plants alive and ready to green up when temperatures cool and rainfall returns. So it's educating the public on that they don't need to water as much. So it doesn't necessarily have to take excess water. We all know that we need to conserve water and be wise stewards of our water. That's a given. Also, especially even in the western part of the county, we're building all these apartments. And if you notice, there's no green space. Where's the kids going to play? In the parking lot. There's nowhere for kids to play anymore. You know, how many of you went out and played night games on the grass or in the field or wherever? There's nowhere. And so the green space provides areas for children and youth to play, provides habitat for urban critters, even the birds. They need green space to we don't even consider it and if you do research, how many actual animals and critters live in urban spaces, and they need green space also. The weed barrier, let's see, covered most areas too. When they put mulch or whatever, they put the weed barrier, and that sterilizes the soil. And so you're just doing double awfulness for the environment in my book. I'm afraid I've run out of time, but it has been shown for sure that Green space does help cool the environment, retains the clean air we breathe and the water we drink, and lowers crime rates. It's proven to lower crime rates. And I thought that's interesting, especially in urban areas. Blood pressure, heart rate, and stress levels. The more urbanized we become, and Utah is one of the fastest growing areas in the United States, more than ever, we need more green space. We don't need to eliminate it. And in my opinion, the water companies have a conflict of interest because they have to keep their levels of money coming in. They do that by selling water rights or leasing water rights, whatever. And the more that they can keep generating, giving out, they need everybody else to conserve so they have water to keep selling or leasing. So the science doesn't support getting rid of turf. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any comments from anybody online? Okay. Any other comments from anybody in the audience?
My name is Janice Campbell, and I live at the north end of the Ogden Valley. And what you need to be reminded of is the distinction that we have a separate and unique climate up there. I garden. We are a zone 3, zone 4 many times in the areas where we have developed the land. That is significantly different than the other side of the valley. And in addition, we are probably one of the densest interface with the wilderness. And many of our community members talk about that. The valley is completely surrounded by national forest, except for the canyon entries. And because of that, we need to sustain the wildlife. They're everywhere up there. It's one of our major driving hazards. So doing everything we can to conserve and keep growing anything for everyone, to clean the air, to give us good water, to keep that water cycle going that produces the clouds. By that means water on the ground. And the end result of that is that the reports I read last Saturday are that those cumulonimbus clouds that are flying over actually reflect 97% of the sun's energy that comes to this earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Denise Trello. Pronounce that correctly. There, Denise? Well, we're having a hard time hearing you, Denise. Sorry if something there. Okay, get it to connect. So anybody else? All right. Well, we'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right. Okay, any other further discussion on the legislative item in question?
I think I just want to make sure that I point out that that while a number of us up here have an issue with the new regulation part of it, we certainly don't want to inhibit people's ability to participate in the program if they wish to. It's a very unfortunate thing that it sounds like it's being tied to that. that if we don't adopt this, then people can't. But that we don't want to inhibit anybody's ability. But at the same time, I know a number of us don't necessarily agree with the regulation that's being imposed. So I just want to put that out publicly that that's an unfortunate situation that is not something we would want.
That sounds like something that should be in part. If there is a motion, we'll entertain the motion.
I kind of like Commissioner's comments to Commissioner Burton, him saying if they've got enough money, why do they gotta hang a carrot in front of us to do it? And incentivize us to follow their rules, but then it penalizes people that don't want to follow it either for future building.
Right. I'll make a motion. You guys ready for one? Let's have it. Sure, go through it. Okay, so I move that we deny file or get this right. ZTA 2023-04. Findings are wouldn't be consistent with the general plan. Like green and open spaces. We also don't know that it's in the best interest of the general public, understanding urban heat effect. And that is it good for the health and safety of the general public? We would also I think how to bring your comment into that, but we agree with it. We as a commission or in this motion would like to ask the applicant to find a way for others that, even if it's not in the code, to be able to be, they can get approved or apply for this program without it being in the code. I think that's all I have. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, any discussion on the motion to recommend a denial with the findings stated? I'll try and restate them, that it does not meet the general plan, concern for health and safety, for welfare, wilderness, surrounding areas, and benefit to the general public. And then also we have a finding that we'd like to see the program implemented without the restriction. Better stated, is that right? Yep. Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimous with 6 members present. Okay. All right, with that, we will move to public comment for items not on the agenda. If you have a comment, please come forward or raise your hand online. Okay, we'll move to remarks from planning commissioner. Are there any remarks? Just want to make one from the joint session before. Rick, do you think it's possible? I had the opportunity of meeting with the PAC that actually put forward the legislation for, what's coming forward for planning commission and county commission. Is there a time that we can get updated and trained on?
Yeah, in fact, if you guys attend the Utah APA conference that we're encouraging you to come to in September, you will get trained immensely on that. And we will pay for each one of your registration to be there. We are hosting it here. So great opportunity to showcase our county and what's going on in that area. The dates for that, just so you're aware, is September 28th and 29th. That's a Thursday and a Friday. So please mark your calendars so that you can attend those. And we will be paying for your registration. And more information will be sent out to you guys online. And we give legislative updates are given there. A lot of valuable training is given at that conference.
I just wanted to ask for clarification. I'm not sure what you had said, something about a PAC?
Yeah, so it's a political action that they came out and they changed the state legislation for how applications. Remember how Gage was talking or Commissioner Pro was talking about how things are getting accelerated, how they fear that planning commissions, and county commissions are really getting pulled back on there's just the PAC actually know the person that put forward that law. So he was able to explain it to me, but I think that it's better to understand what did the state adopt and have us be trained by that.
Thank you.
Yeah, this will do a lot more than just that. So that's why I'm encouraging that, because it will help train you on other things too.
All right, any remarks or let's have the planning director report, I guess.
Don't have anything to report on.
Legal?
Oh, just thank you for having me here. It's always great to visit with the planning commission, but don't worry, Cortland, we'll be back.
We look forward to that.
I
Although we're
don't
glad to
blame
have
you. He's the best. He's the absolute best.
Rick, I do have one question for you. A while back, you had mentioned that there was something coming up on a future agenda that would be appropriate to have a meeting in the valley. We didn't talk about what.
Well, now it's kind of set up so we can do that with what the commissioners indicated. So this will give an opportunity to have that meeting up in the valley either in August or September.
Was this the issue or was there some other issue you had?
No, we were just wanting to have more warmer weather so people can come out to it instead of doing it in the middle of January or February.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll adjourn to a work session. Are we going to the other room? I think I'd rather sit here and let Charlie talk from the podium. Let's just do that. So we're not moving around all the time.
I like sitting in those chairs back there, a little more comfy. But you guys are already sitting in those chairs. No, no worries. This is just fine for me. I've been sitting all day. I've been driving back from Denver. Just barely got in just before you guys started the meeting. So
Taylor Swift concert.
I was there while Taylor was there. Can confirm. Cannot confirm that I was at that concert though.
This is it's confirm or deny, right? Yeah,
I
you're
cannot confirm nor deny. She was signing autographs.
It's all part of the plan, you see. So if Charlie has to stand, he might not talk as long.
That's actually a really good idea. Yeah, let me stretch a little. All right, let's get this going. Let's see here.
Should we start with Commissioner Barber had some, did you email some concerns about even the proposed changes?
Yes, go ahead. What this is. I guess I'm not understanding. What they are anything. Things like that. I have a culture. Talks about doing this. I'm not sure how a wedding that you make. Wedding. Exactly. Or a birthday.
Sorry.
Just that, and then I'll ask the second one.
Okay, 122. What was the other one? line,
Saying. 122, I think, is the definition. So in the black line, I think. 122.
okay. I was just looking over at the other definition. So purpose and intent.
Yeah. So
Okay.
122, take that.
Mhm.
Create means extra agricultural adjuncts.
Mhm.
Then, the other section. Talk about birthday trains.
Events facility. Yep. Yep.
I don't get the connection between something completely non-agricultural. Agritourism. Farm revenue, you're meeting requirements.
Petting zoo.
Well, but that doesn't. That's part of it.
Okay, so let's hang on one second. Let's check one more section just to make sure we tie it all together. Let's go down to the uses. See. That was a events facility, right? Yep, no specifications. Let's check standards really quickly, just to make sure we're looking at everything together. Nope, nothing in there for events facility. So yeah, very valid question. I'm open for discussion or debate on how you guys want to address
I
that.
guess I think I think the tie is there in that you could have petting zoo or you could have a farm themed birthday party. I think that's fair. And a wedding, I could see that. And I think it should be open, right? And as an example, you'd look at like what's in Sunnyfield Farm, right? It's a beautiful backdrop for what you could have a wedding here. So I can see the line. I think there should be a tie between allowing the farm to do that, but I think it should still be, well, it's a farm and we do some weddings, kind of is the way I would view it. No, we're a birthday party place. Is not the way you would describe it. It'd be a farm that does occasional birthday parties or occasional weddings. You know, even to the amount of, maybe every once a week they could have a wedding, but it's still a farm. Yes, is that, or is there a different question that you have
So
that I'm
I
not
think
understanding?
I guess it brings out nothing in this makes the agricultural operation has to have. Nothing says there needs to be. I'm just wondering, just creating an opportunity for venues. That happens when something happens to have some sort of agriculture, and gets that special. There may be somebody down the road, have a way nice. So I'm just wondering if that's. Want that to exist? Probably need to recognize. Probably needs to remain. It's happened to be in a place. As an agriculture. 100 yards of it. So if it's a loophole, okay. Then it is this ties also to the second. Proposed. New wording.
Blackland.
That here to take the activity out of the qualification process, small. So the product can't qualify under. Right now, today, you have to.
I sure thought it said that, but I've been schooled otherwise. If you You got to read the exact language, and if you take the exact language, it doesn't say you have to qualify. It says that you have to be capable of qualifying. In other words, as long as you're producing a certain amount or within a certain period of time, just someone could argue, and they are, by the way, arguing that if you would otherwise qualify having 5 acres or greater, then the ordinance does apply to you, basically. So there was a little caveat that seemed to be, I would say, loophole seemed to be written into our existing ordinance.
If you don't mind, can I hear the attorney say that?
I don't know that this attorney said that to me, but
Well,
we can pull it up.
The
Let's pull it up.
interpretation of that, I would just like to hear somebody that's.
I just want to make sure while he's studying this, he's gonna need a minute. Again, this is me understanding this, not as the applicant. As a county, actually, if they're capable of being in Greenbelt and they're not in Greenbelt, isn't that a benefit to the county? Because then they're paying higher taxes. But yet they're capable of it. So isn't that a benefit because the taxes coming in would actually?
It's a little more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Let's go to the exact language just so we're all looking out, reading off the same page, and we'll put Chris on the spot.
Are you putting it on the screen?
Yeah, hang on just a second. Let me get it up. Sorry, I don't like how Zoom online works. Let me get this. Okay. Mr. Crockett, this is for you. Here's what it currently says. Agriculture is the preferred use, preferred use in the agricultural zones. Therefore, all agritourism uses activities shall be complementary and clearly accessory to the primary agricultural use. To guarantee legitimacy and viability, an agritourism operation shall demonstrate that the subject property has been qualified under the Farmland Assessment Act, or that the subject property is currently or will be within the next growing season producing an agricultural product in an amount that meets or exceeds the production requirements of the Farmland Assessment Act. And as we discussed this with other council, the determination on this was meets or exceeds the amount. It's amount of product, not acreage. So if you've got 3 acres instead of 5, you could still qualify for agritourism. Otherwise, you would have to, in all cases, have at least 5 acres actively producing agriculture in order to qualify for agritourism. So your market, which one is it? The family garden or whatever the smallest one is, the 3-acre one, would never be available for agritourism if this little clause wasn't even written.
I see it tied to the product.
But there are standards as to how much you have to.
That's correct.
So there still is subjective analysis that would go to a small operation and say either you do produce records could show.
Did you mean to say objective analysis?
Objective.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
You take, but what you wrote in that highlighted section,
More subjective.
completely subjective.
Mhm.
Does it smell like a farm? If it does, it is.
Yeah.
To me, it would just seem that if you make it completely subjective, you're opening up valley for all sorts of difficult situations.
If you're okay with it, we could plug in the same language that we already have that is more objective. I didn't read it that way in the first case. And I know in our last discussion, I think it was Commissioner Burton who asked for a little bit of leeway to play with other kinds of agricultural operations. And so I think if we just left it with the language that's currently in there, it would be far more objective.
There was, and I'm not sure. Paragraph. Production required. I think I took this from. Yes. Qualify for. You're under 5 acres. Yeah. Qualify based on what you're saying.
Mhm.
So qualify. land must produce in excess of 50% the average agricultural per acre in a given type of land. Determine production level as a county assessor. Use the following sources. So I don't need to read that. Then it goes down to exception. Here's where it still gives an exception, but it still has objective. The acreage requirement may be waived. Require more than 5 acres. If the owner can show that 80% and more of the use purchasers or leases income derived from agricultural products produced on the land, the production requirement may be waived. If the owner shows that the property has been in agricultural use for the previous 2 years, and that failure to meet the production particularly was due to no fault. Service.
I think it's fantastic. Where are you pulling that from?
I took this from one of your guys.
That was farm one.
That was from what we looked at, whatever we looked at last time. This is from it, which basically says there are still objective measurements if you have less than 5 acres. So if you have a small operation and you really are farming it, and you really can demonstrate that, then you qualify. You're like,
Oh, that sounds really nice. Sounds great. Production requirement. Here we go. Qualifications right here. Okay. Growing season. Okay, good. Okay, well, that actually works out really nicely. So I will plug the old language back into here. I'm actually gonna take that language, finesse it just a little bit better to make sure it's clear we meant what we said when we're talking about product. I might even tie this language that you just read below right directly to it, so it's very clear and there's no way that we could read between the lines there.
I think that's what we're trying to get at, is we want to make sure that there is objective measurements
it's fair to.
that you can say, sorry, yeah.
Perfect.
Yep. Versus what they really.
And as best as we can, right? I mean,
Right.
we'll never be able to get everything, there might be a half-acre apiary that really makes a lot of sense, but doesn't make sense for everything in the agritourism, so maybe that's not the right thing, but in general, if we can get an objective statement that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way we're seeing this is we want to make sure that it's like that you have to meet the requirements of being an agricultural operation before any of this would apply. Like you have to be an agricultural operation of substantial production in order to become to qualify.
Chair, may I ask a question? So that document that you read before, it showed that there was a waiver to the acreage requirement already set up under the Assessment Act. So help me understand, why would we need that additional language after that? Wouldn't we just rely on what the assessors determine? Because isn't that going to be the body that's going to determine whether that act applies or not? Isn't it just adding an extra layer of review that
Little
I mean,
redundant.
I guess it gives the commission some flexibility if they disagree with the assessor that they can.
I think that is the intention. Because the assessor won't find that a 3-acre parcel meets the act. It's gotta be 5 or more. And if it has a house on it, it's gotta be, I think, 5 1/4.
The assessor would still be the person. Group or the entity that determines,
Production.
no, this exception. So if
Right.
somebody was less than. They would still. Be able to determine whether they meet it or not. Do they meet this income threshold?
Right.
Or do they meet the other?
Right.
So are we saying that we're gonna use the county assessor's definition of whether or not?
It's how the current code is written.
They would be the entity that does the application.
Yeah, basically the arbiter.
This code. Farmland assessment maps. Requirements, but they would be the ones to look at the records. Yes. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's what the current code does as well. If somebody can't come in and say, we clearly qualify for Greenbelt, then we would send them up to the assessor's office, or we would go with them and say, hey, we just need to know, can they qualify if they had enough acreage? Otherwise.
So
Are we trying to make that synonymous with you qualify for green belt, so you qualify for agritourism?
Yes.
Greenbelt.
That's what I don't think it should be, but
Greenbelt is different. I have property in the Greenbelt. I think I would buy because of the protections. I mean, maybe I do because of money, but if I had if I was smaller.
I think we're saying the same thing. Ask your question one more time.
so are we stating that if you qualify for green belt tax deduction through the assessor's office, you automatically qualify for
No.
agritourism?
No, that's one of the boxes you have to check. If you qualify, only those that qualify could ask, and then you got to go through the conditional use permit process and validate all of these rules. The only one exception to that is if you can't qualify, and I think based on my reading here, if you can't qualify on the basis of acreage alone, and that may be the way that I need to write this, on the basis of acreage alone, but you would otherwise qualify if you had enough acreage, then let's go talk to the assessor's office, make sure you're producing enough, or otherwise all the qualifications would be met. And if that's the case, and you only have 3 acres, for example, a family farm or whatever a smaller one is, you could still do agritourism, as long as the assessor would agree if that was 5 or more.
If you have less than 5 acres, can you get green belt now?
No, that's the problem. Because our agritourism ordinance is written to allow people with less than 5 acres to do agritourism. We just have to find a way to validate that they're actually a legitimate farming.
So why would the assessor's office want to do it if it's less than 5 acres? They've already made that stipulation saying, well, we're not going to look at it unless it's more than 5 acres.
So the assessor's office in this case wouldn't be saying we're going to put it into Greenbelt. They would just be saying they would otherwise qualify for Greenbelt. They're just telling us and you ultimately as the decision maker that they would otherwise qualify because they have demonstrated to us, the assessor, that they're
Is
producing.
that something they're set up to do for less than 5 acres?
Yes.
They've obviously drawn that line in the sand, so why are we asking? So are we asking them to do something that they're not going to want to do? Is my point. Meaning like,
let me
look, they've
follow up with
said,
them.
You don't have more than 5 acres, we're not going to look at you regardless of whether or not you should qualify.
Mhm.
And now we're saying, let's let them decide.
Let me
And
follow up with them
wonder
because
if
I know
that's
when this was
realistic.
created, it was created with the assessor's office as well. So they were on board at the time, but I don't know, things may have changed since then. So I'll make sure that they're okay with this before we move forward.
And when we say 5 acres, it's a parcel that actually has to be bigger than.
My concern is, one, if that's just to check a box first, like if that's all I have to be. 2 is, well, are we trying to ask someone to do something they won't want to do?
Can I actually read it? And maybe I'm just not familiar with this area as 2 different possible approvals. One, you just take what the assessor does as part of the regular job duties. And if they have qualified, then
Then we don't even need to ask the assessor. We already know they're in Greenbelt. Yeah.
Right.
well, and then does the assessor take into account future possible production will be in the next growing season? Do they take that into account?
They're gonna have to in this one in the agritourism. That's kind of my point is like, so I have 3 acres. The assessor currently doesn't come and ask me if I produce any. And so if I'm going to them, I'm adding a whole nother layer.
Yeah, and so maybe you might take what the assessor just does regularly and put in that you as a commission make the determination of whether that future the rest of that sentence applies. So, yeah.
I kind of think this is I try not to do this when I write code, but I think our current code is written this way because we didn't want to copy and paste farmland assessment requirements in our code to have the planning commission be the interpreter of farmland assessment. So I think they just said, we'll just go ask the assessor's office. Let me verify with the assessor's office what they're willing to do, given the text that we have here and the text we have in our current ordinance. And if that's not something they're comfortable doing, or if I could verify with them what they would otherwise do to verify farmland assessment, maybe I could just take that and put it right into our ordinance. And we could have the Farmland Assessment Act tract, which is for taxing purposes, and we could have the farming tract for agritourism purposes. And neither of the two meet. Maybe I could get it that clean, so we don't have to get other agencies involved. Let me try. Let's see what I can get for you guys.
So are we clear on the birthday party and the weddings? Does that like, I guess I want to make sure that we got that. Is there any clarification that way? Or maybe like, am I understanding? Because the way I see it, I could see that those make sense to be done. And I want to make sure that I'm capturing what your concerns are.
I'm just wondering out loud if
And in
that doesn't open up. There will not be unintended consequences. With respect to that. If that becomes all agritourism is in the valley is. Birthday party, a series of birthday party venues, is that what we're? Right now, there's no. Which is too bad, but. If. There becomes these various. Side door. Activities in these. Smaller venues that somehow that do qualify. Is that what we're, I guess that's all I'm asking. If so, then we should do it with. Eyes wide open, that'll probably. Could be a. That's what.
I think it's important to make sure that this part that we're talking about now has teeth or can go. Meaning, because they have to come in for a conditional use permit. We know that, but we have to approve it if it meets the code, right? And so if we can't put like things in here now that we write that allows us the ability to be like, well, dude, like, your Airbnb operation isn't really agritourism. So sorry, that I think that's important. And I hope, because I think my take on it is we should encourage birthdays, weddings, family reunions for these types of events. I think they're the right place. It can be a very it can help the farm succeed, and it can beautify the surrounding area. It might be, maybe some of the birthday parties get in hand, but for the most part, I would imagine that you do a good job if you're charging for it. So I think those need to be encouraged in this type of application, but we need to make sure that we can be like, I don't think your Airbnb plan or whatever is, we can approve that because it's not. I've seen your house 1,000 times and it's just not, you got a long ways to go. Come back when you're actually farming or something. So
I left this as it is, just because it was one of those things that I didn't know where you guys would want to go with it. As I mentioned in our last work session, there are some things that are just, to me, I would say is also clearly not agritourism, but maybe it's clearly not agricultural related, but maybe we could find a tie to it. And I just wanted to make sure we had the dialogue. So maybe what we could do in here is we could say, first off, I think the issue is we don't define anywhere in our code what an agri-tourist is. It's left for us to assume, but it does say opportunity for the agri-tourist to rent an area. So maybe what we say is that area has to be related to the farm. It can't be separated from the farm.
I think these need to be bigger, for sure.
Bigger.
You got to have more land,
Okay.
I think you can't.
Let's start there.
I mean, weddings, you have 1 acre, it's going to impact the neighbors a lot more.
It's hard to have parking on 3 acres at a wedding.
Exactly. I'm sure it happens. We're going to have an event area. Park, and you can have facilities.
So not allowed in the 3 or the 5 acre farm type, but allowed in the 10 or larger. We okay with that? Okay.
Yeah, and I got 3 daughters and they're gonna want to get married, and somebody's getting married, the farmer's daughter.
I think that's a family event on your personal property. Do you want to add a qualifier in this special regulation section to say you have to use the barn for the venue, or I don't know, something.
I don't think we want to over-regulate. I don't think that's anyone up here's intent in anything, but we want to make sure that it follows the intention that was set forth.
Right.
As is mentioned in almost every meeting we have, we want to preserve the valley's agricultural history, and people are not making money farming. And so what can we do to help balance that, where the valley gets to stay agricultural? And if they're not going to make the money farming, then they might have to sell off the farm. So let's help them out by letting them have a side business, but keep it a side business. The fear is the abuse of this.
Yeah.
So as the chairman said, putting teeth in for the qualification, rather than necessarily trying to be super strict on all the details of what they can and can't do and where it has to be on your farm. But really the teeth need to be in who gets to participate in this privilege, right? If I have a veg patch and I decide I want to run, a bed and breakfast out of my place, and because I'm going to cook things that, like, one of the vegetables came out of my garden, do I qualify? I don't think I do.
Right.
But I know there's people that are going to try for that. So really having it very, very clear with very little room for interpretation as to who even gets to play with this new privilege.
I'm smiling a little bit because this is really the crux of what we do here, right? I mean, the whole point of land use ordinances is to tell people you can only do this much with your land, except for this and this and this and this, and then we keep on adding things too. And the more we add to, the more specific we get, and then the more specific we get, the more over regulatory we get, and then we're all back into the planning cycle again. So I agree. We definitely need
This is your time to shine, Charlie. Put it down.
Well, I think we have something here. So we do have a few things under qualifications. We do have a primary use. So all agritourism operations shall clearly be accessory and incidental to a primary agricultural use of the property. But even with that sentence, I still struggle to find that a wedding chapel is the same thing as an agricultural operation or has a clear tie to it. And so this may be one of those things that is open. I don't want to call it a loophole, because if it's intended, it's not a loophole.
I think the challenge here is you're telling one landowner they can do things, and you're telling another one they can't. And that's where, the one who gets to do it, there needs to be a defined bar, and there needs to be a reason, which I think we have in here. A good reason, which I think we have, but then there have to be parameters, such as the chair was saying, the size of the property matters for sure. And large events, even 100 people in a small venue, probably doesn't work.
I wonder if that's something we ought to look at, is
Number of people.
as tied. So it's like, okay, we have an event facility and 10 acres is the minimum, but if you put, and then maybe we're thinking too far ahead here, but you get 1,000 people in there, it's going to be too small.
Right.
So
I would say,
but this would be, you'd start out with 10 acres, you'd start small and grow.
no greater than 100 people per 10 acres, 100 people.
Why don't we look at that at the CUP level? Because the impact is unknown until someone says, I'm going to do weddings. You're like, well, what's your parking looking like then? And it's almost evaluated. Instead of putting it in the code, you evaluate it at the impact level of the parking.
That is a good question. That's right. Because if you look at the way this is written in terms of visitorship, I do address that in this mostly based on parking, because that really parking and noise a little bit in terms of hours of operation, but mostly based on parking.
So do some of these need to be conditional? For example?
All of them are conditional. Everything across the board in agritourism is conditional.
But I mean, like the agritourism events facility, I come and say, hey, I'm gonna do weddings on my farm. I've got 10 acres. I do this. And we have this really good backdrop across the lake. And so we found that it makes sense. And we're gonna do weddings. And then we say, well, that's approved, but then we find out it's 1,000 people that they are bringing in.
Yes. Yeah. At that point.
Because that's what I mean is conditional, like, okay, agritourism event, weddings are allowed on 10 acres conditionally, right? That you're not gonna have 1,000 people kind of thing.
Yeah, we would need to specify what that number is though, and more than happy, we could put it right in here, no
Just-
more than 1,000 people.
Maybe I'm overthinking that. I don't know.
And that isn't the intent of the applicant that I represent, but just the thought is, in my mind, if it's not spelled out, it's not necessarily allowed because it wasn't part of the plan that was. So then you could go for revocation, right? So if someone's like, hey, you're not supposed to have 1,000 people on here. Like, so you come back and you're like, let's look at your impact. No one wants to do that. So what should be done is a question of what are you going to do? Is wasn't a use you applied for conditionally in your conditional use permit. So therefore you could revocate, right?
Yep, let's go up to. Let's go to that section here, production. See
Just
how
to your
this-
point, Mr. Wampler, it's just how much do we want to put in here and then how, because there's still a whole nother layer of impact on CUP that we get a review.
There is, but at some level, we do need to have that restriction, because as we found, if we're not clear about what you can and can't do, then we cannot come back and say, you couldn't have done, you shouldn't have done that, right? Because the legal matter will go to the person.
Yeah, if we're not clear, if we get to the conditional use level on the specificity of that, it's going to be hard to come back and revoke something.
Yep.
If we haven't addressed that at the conditional use level.
Agreed.
So it's important that when we are reviewing the conditional use, that we look at that specificity. We look at parking, we look at hours of operation, we look at what type of impact that's going to have on the residents in that area and address that. And that can be done, and it's supposed to be done at the conditional use level.
So it needs to be, whether it's here or there, it's got to be somewhere. But what I was referring to about not putting, the whole kitchen sink in this was more about how your wedding must be in the barn. If it's a beautiful day and they want to go outside, good.
Everyone has to wear boots.
Right, exactly. I don't want to get that
Okay.
detailed, but things like, if your property is this size, then you have the maximum capacity of, that makes sense,
Okay, so in terms of hours of operation, number of patrons, right now we have, in your application, you have to provide, so let me make sure this is written correctly. Yep, supplemental information. You have to provide us with normal and routine hours of operation, anticipated events, times, dates, times, or examples of anticipated events, dates, and times that the operation may go beyond the normal hours and routine operation, normal and routine hours, anticipated number of normal and routine daily patrons, employees and vehicles, and anticipated number of patrons, employees and vehicles at times or for events that go beyond what is normal and routine. And then we define what normal and routine is here below. And so I think we could address this at the conditional use permit level, but there is still a little bit of subjectivity in that determination. What are we going to ask for? Are we going to ask for a traffic study? Are we going to suggest that 10 acres can't fit 1,000 cars?
Right. I think what I'm getting at though is you have to have a farm, right? So if you have 10 acres, you already have to have so much farm to
Right.
farm.
And it's got to be
in the
10
barn.
acres of farmland.
Exactly. So
Right.
that's the point of so it's not like
So
they
it's
could go
definitely more
put
than-
parking on 10 acres and build this huge barn. That's just not the use. That's not incidental to the farm use. So that's where I'm like, when it actually comes,
Self-limiting.
I've done I've done a number of CUPs with you guys and every time and outside this county. And I have to fill this out. I have to talk about who's going to be there. And then at the very bottom, it says, if you don't follow this, it all goes away and you'll come, and I have. 18 times I went back for an applicant that didn't. I did the revocation hearing, right? And so the point is, I get it. I know it's going to be a very big thing for you, especially when it comes to agriculture. It'll be reviewed, but if there needs more clarity to your point, like let's throw it in there. I'm just trying to think. What do we do at the code level versus what do you do at the conditional use level? And not you guys, whatever needs to make sense.
I think at the conditional use level, we can address it, but it's important to have certain regulations that you feel are important in this, because if you're thinking that it's not even appropriate and you make it a conditional use, you can't deny it unless you find unreasonable hardships that can't be mitigated. That's the only way you can deny it. And so, when you look at the code, I'm glad you're looking at the specificities, because this is a time to do that.
Okay, so I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to make sure, I believe I wrote it in here. I just don't recall where I put it. I want to make sure it says that in the event anybody's operation goes above and beyond what their application said or what the planning commission ultimately approved in the conditions of approval, that is subject to revocation. We can call them back in during the revocation process and have them come back and reapply for an amended permit if it fits, and then the planning commission can readdress it that way. Do you feel like, I mean, that still gives a little bit of wiggle room on number of people? Could potentially still give you some wiggle room on.
So are you saying that when they came in for the conditional use permit, that they would state, we want to put a wedding venue, or we want to do whatever?
Yes.
And that they would state the maximum people at that point?
Yes, that's
And so,
written right in here.
and
as a
so
requirement.
if we can prove that they have exceeded that, then we call them back in.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, and we're not, we're not trying to be the sticklers on that
Mhm.
over, but I think the goal here is to be able to be like, your parking situation,
Sure.
this is killing.
If the
us.
neighbors are having a really big problem with it,
Neighbors have
yeah,
a real problem with this. We need to be able to go back.
absolutely.
I'm always trying to find a way to write in that I get to go out and do a stakeout one night with a clicker, so let's do it.
Do we need to look at like setback things we talked about later, for example? Houses, 50 feet from the property, that kind of stuff.
I do want to make sure we get to those details, yes.
I want to make sure, well, we have some members of the public here. They have we can talk about, so.
Fantastic. Do you want to go through all this and then ask, or do you want to ask any questions? And
I talked to the applicant and they're good with stopping early, so I'm gonna hear from. Then we'll kind of keep going, see how it goes.
Okay,
So.
great.
Please come give us, if you got some comments you want to make. That's good. On this agritourism, if you have some comments, we'd like to, know what would be. What your thoughts?
My name is John Contos. I live here in Ogden, Utah, and I farm. I'm a retired school teacher. And so I farm. I think agritourism is, just like you were mentioning earlier, such an important thing because I think you're seeing a decline in, a farm being able to kind of happen and make a profit. One example I want to give you is there's a place down in, I go to a lot of these conferences. There's a place down in Torrey, Utah. It's a husband and wife, and they have these special apples. It's an apple orchard, and they basically do hard cider from their orchard. And it is agritourism, and they bring people in and they have that situation. And I think that it's, what else is important is that we don't get caught up in 5 acres or, versus 3 acres. There's a lady by the name of Cimbria Patterson. She lives in Salt Lake City. She goes to all the meetings in Salt Lake for agriculture. She runs a place called Red Acres Center. And she can tell you firsthand that you don't have to be in Greenbelt to be a farm. You could have 3.2 acres, you could have 4.5 acres, and you would still qualify. You might not get the break in taxes like you were mentioning. You might not get that break, but we've got to recognize small farms, even urban farms. My business is Arrowhead Urban Farms, and I have 3 places, one in Harrisville and 2 small plots right here in Ogden. And I have a CSA, and I sell to people that get vegetables for 20 weeks. So I just want to say a few things. I think agritourism is up and coming. Of the 16,000 or so farms in Utah, a wide amount is small farms in nature. So Weber County, Utah is a great destination for agritourism, offering a variety of agricultural and rural experiences for visitors. Here are some examples of agritourism activities you can enjoy in Weber County. And so you've got to consider the scope of things. yeah, maybe the weddings, maybe acreage with the weddings or birthday parties. I think it's all probably important to go over that. You would have a fruit and vegetable picking. That would qualify as agritourism, farm tours, farmers market, ranch experiences, agricultural festivals, honey and beekeeping, and educational workshops. I do think that the situation, you could have 4 acres. And on that 4 acres up in Ogden Valley, you could have 1.5 acres that's actually active with growing. You might have 3 greenhouses in that 1.5 acres that are 30 foot wide by 96 feet long. Well, you would grow the produce in those situations. It's not just 5 acres, a tractor, and the tractor plows the field. It's way different these days. And so you have to take into consideration many of these things, but I do think there's a place for agritourism. It really makes sense because it's revenue that comes to the county or the place where you are trying to sustain things. Yeah.
I think that, our goal is to encourage as much as possible, but we just want to make sure that, and it's tough, right? So we talk about per production. You could put a couple storage units, what are they, storage containers on your property and put plants in it, and now you're an agricultural operation. And you could do an Airbnb, right? I mean, that's the hard part about this, is our intention is we want the farms to stay, we want the people to come and visit them, and we want to create revenue. But you could have a 1 acre lot, you can have a shipping container filled with lights and lots of plants in there, and then you glamping operation that doesn't really fit what we're after, what we're trying, what the intent of this is, because the intent is to help the farm and not allow people to do Airbnb without.
And I think that's why the language talks about scale, and even if it's a small property, there has to be enough scale where it's a legitimate farming operation.
Shanna Francis, Eden. So my concern is my next door neighbor has put in an application for agritourism. And that's wonderful. I love it. I'm a farm girl. But my problem is, prior to this, they were running an illegal accessory dwelling unit. And so when the county came down on that in an area they're not allowed to have, it's situated, it directly abuts Patio Springs subdivision and Eden Hills. And then my property is between them and Eagle Ridge. So he's got subdivisions, formal subdivisions all the way around him. And when the county came down about the illegal accessory dwelling unit, he hires a planner. Everyone, I'm sure, knows Rhonda Kippen. We love Rhonda. But to find a way that he can have his accessory dwelling unit where his real money is being made. And now I feel like it's a pretense that he comes in for conditional use. And then the plan he's asking now for 2 accessory dwelling units plus campsites for trailers and people to come. And as long as he's tying it in to agritourism, we were going to be affected, myself and the other neighbor next door and those all around, by noise. Is it going to be handicapped accessible? Will they be taxed differently under? I haven't read the proposed ordinance. I don't know, how do they assess the property values if it does become agritourism? Is it now a commercial venture? But we didn't invest in our property so that we could live next door to a commercial campground. And that's what the neighbors, what we're fearing is going to happen. So definitely, and it's under 5 acres. So please look at the size, because they say they can buffer, but really, I mean, we're in a bowl, you hear everything. And he's applying for 12 large events a year with 100 people at those events. So anyway, it's a real concern for me as a next door neighbor to one of these. So there are, I believe, unintended consequences. Please consider those. Thank
So
you.
if I heard you correct, Shanna, you want to make sure we have objective teeth.
Yeah, because and then even if they do, go against something that's in the ordinance, and we've seen it with short-term rentals, it takes literally years to do anything about it. And the whole time you're sitting there suffering with it. So it can be a problem, even if you do have teeth. So please up front, set some very specific guidelines. They help protect the neighbors in the neighborhood too, that invested in their properties.
So Charlie, with that, like, what if we cut out some of the smaller stuff? And I'll let that grow, meaning we say, look, let's create an agritourism that's more targeted toward large venues. And the smaller stuff, we kind of let them grow organically and then come and propose for a change. Does that make sense? So it's like,
You mean their uses?
so it's like, so basically, if there's nobody complaining, we're not gonna bother them, right? So if they're 1 acre and they're doing, people are coming and then nobody's complaining, what difference does it make?
Right.
But if instead, so instead, I guess my point is, maybe we look at this and it's just a thought of, instead of trying to capture every what if scenario, we just say, hey, for the big farms that want to do this, the bigger size, this is what we have in mind. And the small stuff, we say, you're going to do it. And then when we get complaints that are, complaints, then we start looking at individual circumstances that we can address. What do you think of that?
I would almost recommend that you just eliminate the small sites and maybe just look at the large sites.
That's what I mean, is we eliminate that from the code and we say, like, the small stuff's out, but they're still gonna do it.
So ask forgiveness, not
They're still
permission.
gonna do it.
Well, if they do it, then we'll have code enforcement go out and
Well, code
After a
enforcement
complaint,
will
right?
go out, but then it's like, what code enforcement's gonna go out and talk to them, and then they're gonna come and say, hey, can I get a variance? And the real players will work for a variance or a change in the code.
yeah, they'd have to do a change in the code.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know anybody that would be opposed to real players getting it done. You know what I mean?
What if we put in here, the smaller uses may get a permit on a case-by-case basis after negotiation of a development agreement through a legislative decision? I mean, it's almost the same thing as a conditional use permit if we do it the right way. But it goes to the legislative, it'd have to go to the county commission to
It's-
take approval on it.
I'm trying to picture this, and I know you can't picture everything, but if it's like you've got a small, 1/2 acre orchard and you're having people come pick apples or something, most people aren't gonna mind that you have one, the off time that you pick apples, which is a month maybe of the year.
Right.
You have some people there. Is that a big deal? I'm not sure it is. Now, let's change that story, and they're trying to come in and apply for we just say, hey, small doesn't work. Then you come in and you try and apply for Airbnb in these same zones, or then we can say, look, it's not part of the code. You can't do that. And but if they're full agricultural operations, then we might revisit it. You know what I mean? I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of this wrong, but it's
I
like,
see where you're going with that. I think it's something valuable worth discussing. Because you're right, if it's an orchard and the orchard owner said, hey, come pick a bunch of apples, bring the bushel up, I'll weigh it, you buy it and skirt on your way. We're probably gonna say that's an agricultural use, not an agritourism use. Even though this code, if we're saying you pick is an agritourism use, would certainly put that squarely within agritourism. And so this would be a negative replication, it'd have a negative outcome on farmers. So
I guess my
see where you're
thoughts in
going with
this is our goal is to eliminate the bad players as best we can. And, but also enable the large land, because we all, I mean, reality is we're looking for open space, and one acre farms aren't gonna generally
Right.
benefit us in, that sounds so wrong.
They have nothing to
But what
give
I
us.
mean, that's not what I mean, but like, we're looking for open space and it's like, hey, the 1 acre farm where they've already got their house, you know, whether they do the operation or not is not gonna significantly change whether they live there and continue to farm.
Right.
You know, if, you know, but we're talking about a farm that's got, you know, I'm barely hanging on. I've got my house and I can afford to have my house, but I've got all this extra acreage that I want to sell because I can't get any money off of it. That is really what we're going for.
Yeah.
Not the 1 acre who's like, well, I had 1 acre and you can't really subdivide it anyway.
Yeah.
So I almost feel like we should look at saying, let's take it out of all the small stuff and let them do what they're gonna do, and then we'll deal on a case by, because I would think, and I would hope, and maybe we need to write it in there, like you said, that's like, hey, I've got a 1 acre operation that's legit here and I'm growing and that there's some concerns, but I can mitigate them here and I want to become legal because I'm getting big enough.
Right.
And here, let's look at making an alteration. So we're kind of letting the market tell us what things are legal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I hear you on all that. The part that sticks with me is when you say, we're gonna let them do what they're gonna do. That's the part that I'm kind of like, meh.
So
I
for
mean-
example, we've all read the application that, and we had the public comment just now referring to as a small operation. Should we just let them do it until they annoy the neighbors enough to complain to the county, and then the county goes out and says, you can't do it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So let them
Have weddings?
break the ordinance, like not comply and let it go through neighbors' complaint and all of that and that route.
Well, I mean,
We're already
else-
doing that.
Well, yeah, we're already doing that. I
Right.
mean, then we write this.
I know, I
it's
just feel like
not
this is a
gonna
little
make
bit sanctioning
difference.
and like this
We won't-
discussion, and I'm not trying to
We
sanction
won't write
anything.
it, we won't write it down to say, go ahead and break the ordinance. We take action when action is needed.
Because think,
I
like,
get where you're going.
my point being, if you have a small orchard, for example, nobody's gonna complain. But if you're doing Airbnb, people are gonna complain.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kind of actors, we're not really trying to hinder someone from doing agriculture. We're trying to hinder people from doing things that affect their neighbors.
Steve and I already wrote an ordinance to
Negativity.
try and address the bad actors. It's really simple. Don't be a jerk. We're gonna get that adopted if you guys
Well
want.
said.
So,
Can I just remind you, you had opened it to the public. It looks like
well,
one.
we're just,
No, I
we're
know.
not opening it up. It's a public hearing. We're just taking comments, to make
Okay.
sure we hear it.
Well, she has a comment, and then
Oh.
also, we're not on the screen, but there were, I don't know if that opens it up for the people online as well, since they're participating in the meeting.
It's, yeah, I mean, it's not formal, so it's, if
Okay.
someone has.
So, but we
comments.
wouldn't see if someone has their hand raised because the screen's not.
As I sit down and as you listen to the next, prior to the next comments, I wrote something, I highlighted it in yellow on the screen. Feel free to take a look at that. Trying to figure out how do we wrap our head around what is incidental? And I can't think of a incidental use that would be greater in land area, especially in terms of an agricultural use than the agricultural use. So just thinking of a way to try and limit it that way as well. Think about it.
Janice Campbell, and I live in Liberty. And my thoughts on this are, we aren't discussing the actual operational effects of what happens when you get 100 people or more gathered. I would be greatly concerned. We have problems with the sewer and the septic and the water for the people who live here. So we're going to add more for a weekend and have them use what could be a system that is designed for residential use, and all of a sudden put this mass strain on the existing infrastructure. That doesn't sound like a good outcome to me for unregulated events. If people truly want to go into an agritourism thing and call it that and have it, yes, scale it up in size. But it's going to need more than just an okay from you guys. It's going to need a business permit. And it's going to need inspection services. You're going to have food service. You're going to have health service issues. There are many things besides just a 2-day event that could resolve without it being properly regulated as a business with licensing and the requirements that go for other public services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And on in terms of septic and sewer, it's one of the things very specifically listed in your conditional use standards. If it overwhelms the ability for the level of service, what am I trying to say? If it decreases the level of service of any existing system, then that would be a problem. In other words, someone who's proposing to bring a lot of people to their property will have to have a septic system or a sewer system sized to that, to the level of the crowds that they'll be serving.
And that's something that gets proven to the assessor or whoever when they go for this.
It'll be the health department.
Okay.
Yeah, so in those cases, the planners will reach out to the health department and say, hey, we've got a agritourism operation going on. They're going to be bringing in a lot of people. This is the house they have with the existing septic system that they have, assuming they're going to allow people to go to the bathroom inside their house. We're suspecting you're not going to approve this based on the existing septic system, that you're going to require them to put in an upgraded septic system. Now, in some cases, they may say, we're only doing occasional events, and so we're going to bring in some porta johns. I know a health department really doesn't like porta johns, but they may let it go on a few occasions when it's a special event.
Interesting that they wouldn't like porta johns.
Yeah, I know.
If they are in a sewer district, though, they would need to work with that district to make those connections.
And I know the current code says something about the health department. Let's make sure that's a little more clear as well. We're talking
So
about
Rick, you were going to say about cutting out the small. What was your thoughts?
Well, I'm a little concerned about, like Charlie, he mentioned about making it a legislative item with a development agreement. And I think that's a creative way of looking at it, but I almost look at that more as a bit of spot zoning, where you're coming into an area and almost making it like a spot overlay zone in that specific area for that small of a use. If we start looking at this limited size of things, I think we need to just say, no, we're not going to have it on these smaller sizes. We're just going to look at the bigger sizes right now. And then if someone wants to come in and amend the ordinance and do it smaller, then do it that way. I just don't know of any areas where we've had a successful small agritourism operation. I don't even think we've even had a small agritourism application or approved.
Yep, not that I know of.
I
Submitted.
would imagine a lot of them are just doing it. And that's kind of my point, is like, it's already happening.
Yeah.
The only thing is when it gets so big, then it becomes a problem. Because
Yeah.
right now, if it's doing it and don't know if it approved, it's because nobody really has a problem. No one's come and complained.
Right, but I don't want us representing that they can go out and do these small things from the county side.
Yeah. I think it will naturally go to an area where it's either complaint driven or the public is just tolerant of it, and that will dictate whether future ordinance changes are necessary, if we need to expand or restrict the ordinance. I agree with you. I think CUPs are already designed to be the case by case basis analysis. So I think I would see the benefit of just doing a hard line and then let the public determine where to go from there.
And that doesn't stop the idea of a development agreement from coming to fruition, because it is legislative. It could come to fruition at any point. So if we don't write anything in there about that, someone who's got a smaller piece.
When you
could
say
ask
that, what you mean is, just so I'm understanding, so if I've got a 1 acre operation, I could come and get a development agreement.
Yeah, we don't need to have anything written in the code to suggest that you could get different rules specific to your property through the legislative process.
And
It
like,
really just means you gotta
do some extra work, but
That's
that's
right.
it's kind of my point is like, we're not really I don't think we're trying to regulate somebody who's got like, a real operation, brings in a person every so often to come and see what's going on, and he happens to stay with them, and but we are saying, we want to avoid Airbnbs that's your operation and you're covering it with our agricultural.
Yeah.
And so I think if we even go into the small area, it becomes we have to figure out how to define it. Now, if you're in the bigger area, it's not as, if I'm a 10-acre parcel, your neighbors probably aren't going to mind as much because they hardly are ever going to notice. And two,
As long as the setback is far enough.
yeah, I mean, reality, and two, it's not as common.
So I see market, so what are we calling it now? Garden. Yeah, garden agricultural operation and family agricultural operation just kind of being stricken. Is that what I'm seeing here?
You mean to decide?
Oh, yeah, look at that. I mentioned before, small is 10 acres, greater it's 20 acres or greater.
I don't know. You guys, let me know what you think. This is my idea is going, man, we're really trying to narrow it down, but maybe we just stop. Say, we can't really do it unless it's big enough, and then we'll look at it.
My take is, there is no agritourism really that we know of ongoing in the valley at this time, right?
Well, we approved a pumpkin patch by the monastery.
Is that agriculture? Is that a farm stand? Is that
I can't-
agritourism?
That one's agritourism. They came
It
forward.
was a conditional use, right?
Was it? I don't recall.
Yeah.
Was it?
Because that's in the FV3 zone. Okay, well, that's good, because that's a good benchmark.
I don't remember how many acres they have.
Big. It's big. And that's a good benchmark.
Yeah, I think that's right.
My outlook is that you're going to see this more with the smaller operations. That pumpkin patch thing is extremely unique. And you're going to see people pushing the envelope to where they want to do more non-agricultural stuff than agriculture. Running classes or teaching people about whatever they're doing is a great idea. But there's probably way more money in wedding venues and overnight stays. And I think we just have to, whatever we do has to factor in those two realities. They're going to be smaller. They're not going to be hay farmers, and they're going to hustle whatever they can out of the operation. And they're probably going to impact neighbors because they're probably going to be more proximate than not to others.
I guess my thoughts on that is, yeah, I totally agree. And I think that farms are going to trend towards smaller operations, especially in our area. And maybe we need to do more of a wait and see with the smaller to see what really comes up, right? As it fits. That's my whole thought with this is like, they're gonna push the envelopes. We don't really know, but why are we trying to write outcomes for things we just don't know when we could say, for big ones, these are qualifications. For small ones, we'll wait till we really, because then, for example, if a guy's been doing it and he's really doing it and he's honest, he comes in, he has a track record, right? And we can start going, well, yeah, let's look at development agreements or changing it to make it make sense. Because as we've said, it's really more the exception, but if it becomes more popular, we change the ordinance. So that's kind of my thoughts.
So you're saying we put in a hard cutoff for now at 10 acres ever. And then below that, we say no. And then if somebody wants to come back and try to change it, they could.
I don't see a lot of harm in that. I mean, a couple missed opportunities maybe here or there if it happens, but they'll be here to ask. And I think I would say that's the safer way to go about it.
I mean, I would imagine that the planning staff has the intention to help them grow, at least based on everything that the plan says, help that be an encouraged thing. So if someone comes in with a great idea that we don't know what it is, it's 5 acres and they've been doing it and now they've found this thing that they want to do, it would be more of a, yeah, let's
get you on a work session.
Let's do something that we can either change the ordinance or do a development agreement. I don't know how we set that standard that, hey, try not to just say no.
I think that's a customer service strategy the commissioners have already ingrained in us. So
I can get on board with being more conservative in the rollout, because once we say everybody has this to tap into, we don't really have the ability to then say, no, we didn't like the way you did that, right? So if we actually are more conservative and only roll out at a certain level and do a little bit more of a wait and see, and we can come back down the road, and I think that it's a reasonable thing.
And, you know, so some of the. Got like we've got a 3 acre that's doing some kind of farming and doing an Airbnb on the side. Well, he's gonna get shut down for Airbnb. But if his farming keeps going, we know it's a good thing. It's kind of my other thought. And then it becomes, oh, yeah, proven that this is a thing you're actually doing. And talk about it.
Just off the back of my head, I'm thinking something. Do you want to stick with the idea of 10? Or would 6 be a better idea? And the reason why I say that is because if they can't do the agritourism operation, which if they're legitimately trying to save the farm, the next best option is to sell out and develop, right?
But they can come to us for conditional use, can they not?
Well, no, they can come, this is the conditional use, right? And so if we're excluding them from this, they couldn't ask for the conditional use, they could ask for the code to be changed to then let them go through the conditional use. And so I'm thinking in terms of opportunity and motivation. If a landowner has to go through a lot of process in order to save the farm, it's just easier to sell to a developer and get it developed and sell it. So do we want to do, we could do 6, we could do 9, we could do 10.
If we did 6, that would set the standard of someone who has an addition.
That's why I chose 6.
Kind of makes sense.
Hopefully that keeps them from developing that additional unit.
Yeah, because as I said, you have your house and you're doing a farm. Not that I want to see, it's not viable. The intent of this is to try and help keep farm.
So 6 isn't arbitrary. You picked 6 because that gives them another TDR,
Basically.
right? That gives them another development, right? Because of the 3 acres, right?
And they're choosing not to develop the 3 because it's a farm.
Right.
And we're saying, we'll help you. We don't get to tell people what to do, which
Right.
is kind of my point too.
But we'll give an option.
So we're saying, here's an option.
Yes.
Where the other stuff, we're saying like, kind of let us know what you find out.
Right.
See it.
Yes. I just want to clarify, because otherwise I was like, where'd 6 come from? So that makes sense.
As Commissioner Jenkins would say, I pulled that out of my back pocket.
There you go. That makes sense.
Okay, I want to get out of here at 5:02. Everybody agrees. Can we, are you guys good with that? All in favor?
What, with the 5-2?
Yeah, so about 4 or 5 minutes left and then we'll.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to cover a few more things, cover whatever we can in that.
I'm feeling uncomfortable that if there are, because we don't see them, if there are people with their hands up, because we just let the people in the room, I feel like we shouldn't.
Marta, is
Maybe I'm wrong, but it just feels like.
They can unmute.
No? Anybody have their hand up? Nope. All right, moving on.
It's gonna take me,
Thank you. I just wanted to.
it'll take me 3 minutes to share again. Just kidding. Okay. I think I've got good marching orders on that respect.
Does this address your concerns?
You're probably gonna want to think about it, but what do you guys think generally about that? Because otherwise we got.
I mean, you all have acreage. How does that sit with you? You can see what?
I can see his point with 6 acres. My concern is otherwise we've got to overregulate everything. It becomes so difficult where if we just say, look, we don't really know. Bring us let it kind of grow up organically and see what happens. Bring us the amendments.
Okay. Regarding that other one that I had you read, highlighted, are you comfortable saying the agritourism use, the area or the activity area of the agritourism use cannot be larger than the area of the agricultural use?
Say that again?
The activity, let's just.
I don't think you said the farm can't be bigger than the tourism.
Other way around. The tourism cannot be bigger than the farm.
That makes sense. That's not what I thought I heard.
In terms of area, can you think of any?
So that would include parking, roads.
Bathroom.
Yep.
Makes sense.
That helps keep it accessory and incidental. Actually, we're trying to figure out a way to put some bounds on that. I think that hits it
Sorry, you just said smaller, or is there a percentage point?
Hey,
smaller.
go back to your,
49.9.
should it be allowed? That's a good point. Should agritourism be allowed?
Oh, you mean okay, so we're talking about the S1 zone, but do we want to have to come back when somebody asks in the F5 and the F10 and the F40?
I think if we set limitations on size and whatnot, I think it should be somewhat, we should allow it to go across is the goal. As long as, like I say, if we have objective teeth still, I'm not changing that point, but we objective teeth that way. I think it should be allowed wherever you can prove an operation.
Yeah, the intent is still the same. We're trying to help farmers and keep ag in the valley and
Open spaces. And all
and
that.
open space and yeah.
Okay, in these other zones, F5, F10, obviously F40, they're gonna have to have the minimum acreage, so they won't be able to have like a market garden or anything like that. So that provides a limiter on some of the impacts in those zones. Okay, I added in apiary because we already say it in the code, so I figured might as well add that in. I also added in a children's camp. I think that was Commissioner Burton who wanted that. I threw in their dude ranch. A lot of communities have dude ranches listed, and there's kind of this resurgence. I used to make fun of the word, but there's this resurgence of dude ranches, and 80 acres or greater. I figure this is probably more in the forest areas. Any issues? Okay,
Need to be 8 acres.
well, you can go lower if you want.
What's the standard?
Yeah, what's the definition of a dude ranch?
I haven't defined it here yet, but I have defined it somewhere else. So I'll go grab that definition. by the
I
time
would
we look at it
think,
next time.
I would think, I mean, could you have horseback riding
Yeah,
and
they, a
on
lot of
40?
those back up against national forest and you can just leave from there and not even need it.
But just horseback riding doesn't make you a dude ranch, right? I don't know. I mean,
That's a
hence
big
the
component
definition.
of it, right?
Otherwise, you're just a horse riding operation.
I guess
Yeah,
if you
if I
leave
re-
it, my point being, I guess my concern generally is, hey, if someone wants to open something that makes sense, and they have
Mhm.
40 acres, does that make sense? I guess, I mean, what is the size? That's my point, right? So if you're gonna have people over to your house or in the valley, they're gonna have people over on a constant basis to ride horses and do look at cows, right? Whatever it is that a dude ranch decides to do. What's the minimum size that we would think is unaffecting negatively? You know, is that 20, 40, 80?
I think that comes from defining a dude ranch, because if a dude ranch has to do with learning the cowboy way, and you're
That's it.
gonna round up cattle, you need some space. You need for the cattle, for the horses. It's not a solitary thing. You're doing it in groups of humans as well as animals. And I think
You could have it on different
depending on the
scales.
definition.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you are actively rounding up live cattle. You might just be learning how to rope and ride.
I did that at the Scotsman Center. That's not a dude
On
ranch.
10 acres. Oh, no, right. So there, you could still have like an equestrian training facility,
Hmm.
which is listed somewhere else. It's not even agritourism.
Okay.
But the second they cross the threshold into learning more the cowboy way in a ranch setting.
I think it should define. It'd be defined. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the reason why I put it in ranch is the reason why I put it in the 80 acres, because we already call that a ranch. And it was a dude ranch.
Easy in it.
Nice and easy, but we can go 40 if you want to.
I don't know. I'm good either way. It's just posing the question.
Did you guys want to go over setback standards or we're at that 5.2?
My thoughts on it, some of it should be slightly larger.
Okay. Do you want me to just add a percentage to all of it?
Are these setbacks different than if it was something else being built on a property or existing on?
Yes. This is
these-
above and beyond
this
the
is-
typical standard.
So these are already longer, larger.
Yes. Yeah, and most of them are actually much longer, larger, 300 feet. Most of these zones have a 10-foot side setback.
So I'm picturing that I live on a house and then someone's doing this, doing a food preparation. Maybe it's not a food preparation that I like to smell. And they're 150 feet away,
Not enough.
because that's what it would be, right, from the property line.
Mhm.
And we're already kind of a dense. We're measles map is closer than we
Like, right.
like, right? I mean,
We're already
I
pockmarked.
guess what I'm kind of getting at, we may want to increase some of these to be like, hey, they should be a little bit bigger. We want it, but it should be bigger.
Can I give you guys that as homework? Maybe just shoot me an email on what you guys think it should be and I'll round them all up and find commonalities and come back with some questions if I see differences.
I'm actually good with the setbacks. It's gonna be hard to get with 6 acres.
Okay.
on some of them.
Would you say that you would not favor increasing?
I don't know if they need to be further away.
I guess I'm asking if you'd be a no vote if they are further
I
away.
wouldn't be offended, but I don't
Okay.
think it should be required.
Worth discussion. Do you feel like we're close enough that we can schedule it for a hearing in next month's meeting? Or do you want another work session on this?
I think we've got a lot of questions.
Okay.
I think we'd like to all think about cutting smaller a little bit more.
Okay.
So I'd say we probably need to work on it again. What do you think?
But he's
Applicant?
gonna make the changes, right?
Yeah.
And then it would go to a public
next
hearing. So he's gonna make the changes we talked about tonight.
I think we've covered enough that you're ready to one more and have it be public comment.
The problem is if we have any problems with the information that gets the rest of the information that we haven't gone over in detail.
Right.
Then it gets tabled and we gotta go back and do it
I'm,
again.
I'm fine.
Those-
Like, but,
You could either-
yeah, I'm fine. And we already did a public hearing. We can do another one now that we have more, but we already did a public
We
hearing.
did a public hearing.
Didn't we do one on the,
I don't think we did.
we did. We did.
Tabled it,
No, we had a public hearing. No, we had a public hearing.
right? We tabled it.
Table decision, but not the public hearing.
We
I'm
did-
good with the public hearing. I'm just saying.
We did have a public hearing. There's a lot more that we've added to it. I suggest we have another.
Yeah,
public
it would
hearing.
make sense. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm fine. Like, if it needs to take 1, 2 more work sessions, I don't. Whatever you guys think.
I think we,
This, all of it is.
okay. We want to do it on the next one. Yeah, does that give you enough time?
Perfect. Yep. I'll get them. I'll get it done. I don't have any vacations planned between now and then.
Okay, that's.
Hey, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stack that meeting up.
Well, it's like,
It's not a week, right? 2 weeks, right?
Well, I'm not here anyway. But yeah.
It's gracious. We have 4. We got 3 out.
By the way, none of these changes affect any of the current agritourism applications that are in already.
So you're saying when they come before us.
Based on
Good.
the
I
current
enjoy it.
ordinances, not on what we've been working on. Yeah. Yep, that's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
That's good. Hold on. That's something.